the British or UK Sikh community is able to feel we have representation of the community at the highest possible levels in terms of interaction with the government, in terms of consultation, exchange of views on policy making, what input the Sikh community can make. Can I just slightly step back and say my own observation, experience, or lived contribution go back to late 60s. From then to Bloom Report, we have huge number of individuals, organizations, gurdwaras who have made contribution on several campaigns. And we, in actual fact, respect the history of all those contributions and individuals and organizations who have made their contribution. But nevertheless, we are going through a process now. We have present and future generations coming up and looking to us. What scope, what space are we giving them, offering them to move forward themselves as well as the entire community?
So I wrote in to the public call in my capacity as the co-founder of the National Sikh Youth Federation and the program director at the Khalistan Centre. And through these roles, I've been able to work across borders to develop an expertise into the dynamics of representation. I've been able to engage with questions of representation in various arenas, from Sikh grassroots to governments in different countries. Including in particular cases such as by Jagtar Singh Tara, Professor Ravinder Singh Fuller, Jagtar Singh Johal, and also the Khalistan Centre submitted a brief to the Canadian Parliamentary Standing Committee on Justice and Human Rights calling for reform to the extradition agreements. So in this experience, it's allowed me to develop a particular praxis surrounding notions of representation, which incorporates experiences from my practice and my own theoretical research. I've been able to study this quite deeply through my master's that I'm undertaking at the moment at University College London in culture, diaspora, ethnicity, looking particularly at these questions of representation and these notions of respectability. I've been able to study the existing literature in quite some detail. So my position is, as we heard from the previous speaker, it was actually quite good to listen in to that kind of position, because for me it encapsulates some of what needs to be unpacked the most and looked at the most, because in my kind of 30, 40 odd years now, I've heard this similar kind of narrative and this similar kind of articulation of the problem, which for me only scratches the surface, and it doesn't actually address what representation is. So for me, understanding representation that works in tandem with other notions such as respectability, we have to view these as disciplining functions of this colonial society that we exist in. We exist in a particular cultural hegemonic context living in Britain. So you can't take that cultural context outside of this notion of respectability and representation. Because often when we have a conversation about representation, it focuses solely on the mechanism with which Sikhs in somehow unified pattern need to communicate with the external entity, which is often the government. And then it basically problematizes the Sikh community space as this is a space that fosters backwardness, that fosters extremism, that fosters an incompatibility with the dominant cultural values of the West. And in order to engage effectively and represent ourselves, we need to be professional, we need to be coordinated, we need to be, all of these kind of adjectives are thrown in that center a particular type of Sikh. And this is where I say this is a disciplining mechanism. It's a social construct. And one of the key functions that we see around representation discourse is depoliticizing the Sikh. So instead of actually focusing on serious issues that need attention, the function of any representative body should be to address the politics of the community, should be to understand what's happening, and should be to engage effectively with the grassroots. But that doesn't happen. So what we see is The grassroots becomes the problem space, the Gurdwara becomes the problem space, and you have these blanket generalizations of the youth don't want to get involved in Gurdwara, the committees are corrupt, etc., etc. But if you look into the actual granular layers of Gurdwara, of different committees, of different setups, you find that that's actually not the case. Gurdwara have been a space to foster young leadership. They have been a space to foster community representation at a grassroots level, because ultimately the Gurdwara serves as a function to connect Sikhs to the Guru. It doesn't exist as a function to connect Sikhs to the state. And that's what we've seen when we talk about, narratives of extremism or vocal minorities. We see that the Gurdwara is then also being weaponized as a vehicle through which to discipline the Sikh and further domesticate the Sikh as this citizen that is non-political, that is professional, that exists to serve the needs of this context that we live in, which is scholars describe as neoliberalism. And this is actually centered on coercive participation. And that's a really important point that I want to draw everybody's attention to. When we talk about representation, what we are talking about is the coercive participation of Sikhs in this colonized world order that begins with the recruitment of the Khalsa forces that were dispersed from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time and the Sarkar-e-Khalsa's time to serve the interests of British colonizers. So that's when you see this dynamic first spring forth, where Sikhs are being recruited to stem the possibility of rebellion. They're being recruited into service of the empire. And that's where these narratives of Sikhs as a martial race, Sikhs as being very loyal, Sikhs as being very efficient, colonial administrators really begins to spring forth. And you see those dynamics replicated wherever Sikhs are placed within those colonial territories, whether it's Singapore, like my grandfather who was there in the Singaporean Naval Police, living in a colonial enclave where my dad was born, to other countries such as Canada, Hong Kong, England.
Would you like to move on to the specifics, please? I think you have given sufficient background, which we appreciate.
Yes, so I was just moving on to that. So thank you for the interruption. But so nation states, what we've seen, reward a particular type of performance and reward the particular markers of respectability with inclusion into society and social political mobility. So you're not marginalized as the other, you're not presented as the barbaric extremist. What we've seen from Sant Janel Singh's time is if you want to exert yourself and represent the true values of the Sikh, you are then annihilated and marginalized and pushed to the margins. So for me, the solution to this is actually quite straightforward. And it's something that we don't prioritize enough, because our focus is on the actual mechanism. The ground of representation itself becomes the work that needs to be done. So, and then what that naturally fosters is this sense of competition where one body, one group is competing with another group. So you hear remarks, that are often thrown, that in today's context, they're thrown at Sikhs in law as this so-called self-appointed body. But those remarks have been thrown at every single Sikh organization that's tried to come into this space and try to exist and try to do something that's different. So for me, the question around representation is actually about decentralizing power relations between the Sikhs and the state, rather than merely replacing one set of gatekeepers with another. So in order to do this, the actual struggles, the actual politics, and the serious questions that expose power relations between Sikhs and the state, and not only Britain and other states as well, need to be brought from the margins where they've been pushed through genocide and violence into the center of the conversation. And we need a shift in consciousness. So representation, the grounds of representation, in order to unpack all of these entanglements, the grounds of representation needs to be focused from, instead of the external other, to within actually fostering meaningful participatory relations between the Sikh community and between these various entities that exist, because that's work that nobody's wanting to do. So rather than this mindset of competition, We need to focus on inter-cooperation. We need to focus on decentralizing the state from this equation to actually serving the interests of the Panth, and not by centering the Sarkar or this external other, but centering our own practices. So we don't confine ourselves to this model minority, so we're this passive bloc, or with this radical extremist fringe. We actually look at the various diverse positions that exist within the Panth, and we look at the conflicts that exist, and we build these relationships.
Can you give us a tangible point in terms of who can facilitate the process of gathering views and making sure that diverse, interest-based consultation happens? What should be the tangible process which can enable that?
I think one of the first things to do is actually to start that process, right? Because that process hasn't actually been started. It's only been ever attempted based on very rigid agenda points. If we look at our entire history, if we look at the most recent gathering that we saw in Punjab, the Vishesh Sikh Akatrata, that brought together so many different diverse groups on one of the most serious, pressing political questions, which is the subordination of the Akal Takht structure and function to the Indian state. And that process took a very long time to actually individually sit with various groups to bring them onto a Sanja platform. So for me, the most tangible, most practical step is somebody to take the initiative and invest resources to actually making this happen.
Would you like to give us 2-3 specific points which you think are so crucial for us to take forward in the kind of direction you're suggesting?
So one of the most crucial points is centering a theoretic and building a theoretical understanding of what we actually mean when we speak about representation. It has to go from a surface level conversation actually into real mechanisms. But what that means, what is representation and how is it functioning? To how do we center these serious political questions right now? If you look at what's happening in Palestine and how the British state is responding in order to criminalize and demonize the resistance, this is something that can very easily be mapped onto Sikhs, and we haven't actually wrestled with this. Like what happened with Shamima Begum, how her citizenship was stripped away. This is something that we're very, very close to, even though we like to present ourselves as a model minority. We're only a hairline away from being demonized as the other and having Khalistan, having our flags, our symbols, our protests criminalized. And we've seen a movement from the Indian state to do this. So looking at laws that continue to marginalize Sikh dissent and Sikh resistance and how that impacts our community spaces, I think these are really, really important conversations. It shouldn't just be about the mechanisms with which representation occurs, but the theoretical ground and also the serious political questions. How do we wrestle with them?
Yes, Shamsher Singh, in respect of bringing groups to a Sanja platform, as we've seen, there are a number of organisations that have refused to get involved in this independent review of a government liaison body, for example. How do we bring them together other than just invite them?
I think you've got to continue trying. I think because of the way representation is working and what it does in terms of creating the sense of competition, Sikhs in law is naturally going to be seen as a threat rather than a space for mutual collaboration. So it's a larger question. And for me, again, why we can't strip politics away from this is why is it that Sikhs look at any kind of unit or any kind of structure that's flourishing to address serious questions as a threat? Why do we look at our own organizing as a threat? Well, shouldn't we have multiple diverse organizing entities? I think you have to continue to invite people. You have to continue to do the work. Sikhs in Law is still a new group. This is your second kind of public call. You just have to continue producing materials and resources and speaking into this context space and hopefully what you produce is then acted upon and becomes part of our larger discourse as a community.
In respect of your discussion thus far, it's been quite theoretical in terms of how such decentralizing power, etc., and the views that those organizations should hold. But what about the grassroots stuff? Who do you think is the government liaison body? Who do you think the government is turning to now to address, for example, kids that are being bullied at school, who are having their patke still torn off? Who is addressing that as a policy at government level? Because it's not Gurdwara committees. It's not other people that I have seen in those circles. Do you not think there's a clear need for someone to be addressing those things?
So for me, why I focus so much on the theory side, and also I focus on the practical implications, that's why I talk about praxis. But theoretically, we've got to understand representation from the government is never going to serve the interests of the fund. They're only going to platform individuals or entities or groups that further Sikh domestication and control, because representation is a disciplining mechanism. It exists to discipline you in order to fit into the society of the dominant culture. So in terms of who's addressing bullying and how Sikh values are being represented, the most clear-cut, most deep-rooted and most serious example I've seen of actually addressing that problem has been a grassroots initiative by some Singhs from the Midlands called the Case Sambal Seminar, which I attended. And I found it to be one of the most well put together, thorough and thoughtful and really like beautifully sensitive workshops, and it really actually, because it was produced by Norwegians that have gone through those experiences themselves, it really profoundly addressed the condition of being a Sikh in the UK and facing those types of situations. And nothing from the government is ever going to teach our kids that level of resilience, because it's coming from a position of incredible sincerity. They're talking about the relationship between a Sikh and their kids in the environment of the home. It's a very intimate look at how we can develop ourselves. Right?
Thank you, Shamsher Singh, for that. Interesting about, you talked about the hegemonic cultural context and about dismantling power. You also related to that, I guess, are you talking about having sort of dismantling the power relations and the dynamics in terms of how we can have symmetrical dialogues and meaningful dialogues? Could you just give an example maybe of what you mean by having meaningful relations or dialogues with government?
Yeah, one of the examples I can think of actually comes from Canada. From there's two representative bodies in Canada, the Ontario Sikh Gurdwaras Committee and the British Columbia Gurdwaras Council. And if you actually follow their trajectory as these bodies that represent the interests collectively of Sikhs in Canada, you can see how they're wrestling with this question of international politics, state relations between Sikhs and the Canadian government, and conflict objectives, which are often at odds with international relations and Sikh and state relations. They've tried to navigate that territory very, very carefully and very thoughtfully. One of the examples is, a report on foreign interference that was produced by those bodies that began a whole conversation in Canadian politics about Indian foreign interference. And before, it wasn't even a topic that was considered. And they did that by having a genuine connection to the politics of the community and understanding the implications of that and interjecting at that key kind of juncture of Canada-India relations to bring to light what Sikhs had been talking about for a very long time. As we saw, with the fallout of Canada and India following the assassination by the Beats in India, that became a normalized part of discourse that India is interfering in Canadian affairs. So that's a very successful example of decentering the state and actually looking at the politics that exist in the community and striving to represent them and build a bridge where you're taking the community with you. The representation isn't just a one-way communication happening from the most official body. It's actually...
Shamsher Singh, we have run out of time. If there are any very last comment, otherwise we move on. Thank you. Is there any last comment would you like to make. Otherwise, we have done our time, and we are so grateful to you and for your time and contribution.
No, thank you for putting this together, and I'll be very interested to share more on this. Obviously, that this format is very limiting, but ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾ ਜੋ ਕਦਮ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੇ ਚੱਕਿਆ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ,
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ. Thank you very much. Thank you, ji. Thank you.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ. Dr. Sadhu Singh, I'm chairperson for the Council of Sikh Gurdwaras in Wolverhampton and some other organizations. British Sikh Consultative Forum, I'm the vice chair for that. The consultation which you're talking about, we did that about 15-20 years ago. The Sardi, the Karpandi. But the way we did it is the old-fashioned, having meeting in the Midlands, in the North, in London, gathering the views and then putting that forward. And that was then successful. But today, what we are coming against is, one is Gurdwara committees. The Payatar Singh ne aakhiya ki Gurdwara committees at the present time is still dominated by the first and second generation. They are more interested in buying a house next door than thinking a way forward. How to bring him to Gurdwara. That is lacking, right? Typical example is Sare Gurdwara 103. Though you don't pay, but after 6 months they walked away because the system set up meeting the Honda. Oh, 10-15 ਮਿੰਟ ਉਹਦੇ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਦਗਵਾ ਦੇਣਾ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕੀ ਹਾਲ ਚਾਲ ਆ ਚਾਹ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਟਿਕ ਟੂ ਦ ਏਜੰਡਾ. ਸੋ ਦੈਟ ਇਜ਼ ਸਟਿਲ ਲੈਕਿੰਗ. ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੀ ਕਮੇਟੀ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਸੰਗਤ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੰਗਤ ਕੰਸਲਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਵੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਹੋਣੀ ਆ. ਦੇ ਆਰ ਅਟੈਚਡ ਟੂ ਦ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾਸ. ਪਰ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਆ, that question was asked to me in 1999 ਜਦੋਂ ਸੈਲੀਬ੍ਰੇਟ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਬਰਮਿਊਮ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਜਨਮ. ਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੈਡਮਾਸਟਰ ਗਿਨੀ ਤੋਂ ਆਇਆ ਸੀ. ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਡਾਕਟਰ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਹੈਵ ਯੂ ਐਵਰ ਸੀਨ ਦ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਆਫ ਦ ਸੰਗਤ? ਯੂ ਗੋਟ ਪੀਪਲ ਸਿਟਿੰਗ who are 40 plus or children up to 13-14. What happened to the middle generation? We lost it. And the answer was because of the structure of our gurdwaras. We find the cheapest granthi Japanda ਉਹਦੀ ਉਹਨੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਬੋਲਣੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਮਸੀ ਸਮਝਣੀ ਆ. ਅਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਆ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਮਾਪੇ ਦੇ ਇਨਫਲੂਐਂਸ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਆ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ. ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਮਝ ਤਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ, ਅਸੀਂ ਕਿਉਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਬੈਠੀਏ. ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਰਗੇ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਕੋਈ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਨਹੀਂ. ਸੋ ਦੈਟ ਮਿਡਲ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਵੀ ਲੋਸਟ ਇਟ ਬਿਕੋਜ਼ ਆਫ ਦ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ. ਮੁਸਲਮਾਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਟਿਪੀਕਲ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਹੈ. ਦੇ ਆਰ ਵੇ ਫੋਰਵਰਡ ਅਹੈਡ. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਮੌਲਵੀ ਇੱਥੋਂ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ. They speak English, fluent English. ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਬੈਠਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 23-14 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦਾ ਮੌਲਵੀ, ਆਪਣੇ 5th ਮੀਟਿੰਗ ਸੀ ਵੋਲੰਟਰ, ਅਤੇ ਹੀ ਵਾਸ ਸਪੀਕਿੰਗ ਫਲੂਐਂਟ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼. ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਹਾ, ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਤੂੰ ਕੀ ਕਰਦਾ? ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਮੌਲਵੀ ਹਾਂ. ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਗ੍ਰੈਜੂਏਟ ਇੱਥੇ ਦੀ ਹਾਂ, ਇੱਥੇ ਦਾ ਗ੍ਰੈਜੂਏਟ ਹੈ. ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਫਿਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਕੀ? ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸਾਨੂੰ 20-25 ਹਜ਼ਾਰ ਪਾਉਂਡ ਤਨਖਾਹ ਪਲੱਸ. ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਵਾਟ? ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਯੈਸ ਮਾਈ ਜੋਬ ਇਜ਼ ਟੂ ਗੋ ਆਊਟ ਇਨਟੂ ਦ ਕਾਲਜਿਸ, into the community. They ਸਾਡੇ after 6 months they call us in ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਫੀਡਬੈਕ ਲੈਂਦੇ ਆ ਅਤੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪੁੱਛਦੇ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ. and that's what we are lacking. We're just relying on the ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਗ੍ਰੰਥੀ ਆ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਤੋਂ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੂਤਾਂ ਸ਼ਾਮਾਂ ਥੱਲੇ ਉੱਠ ਕੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਰਿਲਾਏ ਕਰਦੇ. ਇੱਥੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਪ੍ਰੋਡਿਊਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ. ਇੱਥੇ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਨਾ, ਸੰਗਤ ਸਾਰੀ ਅਟੈਚਡ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਆ. ਵੀ ਕਾਂਟ ਲੀਵ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾਸ ਬਾਈ. ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੰਸਲਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਣੀ ਆ, ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ ਮਿਲਣਾ. ਪਰ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਆ ਕਮੇਟੀਆਂ ਦਾ, I'm sorry to say I'm one of them.
Can I ask you, Dr. Sadhu Singh, do you see this as one of the biggest barriers in terms of involving youth or younger or future generation in the Gurdwara life, because the Gurdwaras don't have expertise and knowledge and know how to approach the younger generation as well as the wider community?
ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡਾ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸੰਗਤ ਦਾ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਕੈਨ ਚੇਂਜ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਉਹੀ ਰਹਿਣਾ. ਪਰ ਟੂ ਇਨਵੋਲਵ ਯੂਥ ਵੀ ਵਿਲ ਡੂ ਸਮਥਿੰਗ. We have to have seminars in a separate room in English. ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਬੈਠੇ ਹੋਣ to answer their questions. Once they're satisfied, they'll come to ਸੰਗਤ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ। ਇਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਣਾਉਣਾ, ਕੀ ਸੋਚਣਾ, ਇਹ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੰਮੀ ਡਿਬੇਟ ਆ ਕਿ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਦਾ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਰਨਾ, ਯੂਥ ਨੂੰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਅਟਰੈਕਟ ਕਰਨਾ। Why should youth come to the Gurdwara? There's nothing for them. ਸੰਗਤ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਇੱਥੇ ਰੋਟੀ ਖਾ ਲਾ। ਟਿਪੀਕਲ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਆ ਯੂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਗੋਰਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ, ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੈਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਬਣਨਾ, ਆਇਆ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਜੀ ਉਹ ਉੱਤੇ ਦਰਬਾਰੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਮੱਥਾ ਟੇਕ ਲਾ ਅਤੇ ਆ ਲੰਗਰ ਚੰਗਾ ਜੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। Who is going to tell them ਸਾਡੇ ਬੇਸ ਰੂ ਕੀ ਆ? Who is going to capture him? ਇਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਬਿਗ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਫਸਟ ਸੈਕਿੰਡ ਜਨਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ। ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਬਣਾਏ ਆ, ਪੈਸੇ ਖਰਚੇ ਆ, ਹੁੰਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਪਰ ਨਾਓ ਇਜ਼ ਦ ਟਾਈਮ ਟੂ ਸਮ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਟ ਸਾਰੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਯੂਥ ਸਾਰੇ ਆ ਰਹੇ ਐਂਡ ਯੂ ਕੈਨ ਸੀ ਦਿਸ ਇਜ਼ ਦ ਫੰਕਸ਼ਨੈਲਿਟੀ। ਪਰ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਟ ਇਜ਼ ਲੈਕਿੰਗ, ਮੈਂ ਹੁਣ ਫੈਡਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਉਦੋਂ ਜਵਾਨ ਸੀਗੇ ਜੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਇਹੀ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ। ਵੀ ਗੋਟ ਟੂ youth got to learn, give respect to the elders, and elders got to learn to give opportunity to the young ones. That's missing.
Okay, can we just move on to how do you think UK 6 can better engage with the government to influence policy making, which can enable us to educate our youth with, if you like, mainstream government resources, because this is where the policy issue is, isn't it? That's what the representation is about with the government. How do we actually engage with the government more effectively?
ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਣਾ representation ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ, I don't agree. You are representing Sikhs and you must have a Sikh face. Must be a practicing Sikh, if not Amritari. ਉੱਥੇ ਹੁਣ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਖੜਾ ਕਰਤਾ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕੀ ਪਤਾ ਕੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਿੱਖਣਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ। We got to put somebody who knows, who's practicing, ਠੀਕ ਹੈ ਉਹ ਐਜੂਕੇਟਿਡ ਹੋਵੇ, ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰਲੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਇੱਥੇ ਦਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਪਰ ਹੀ ਸ਼ੁੱਡ ਬੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟਿਸਿੰਗ ਸਿੱਖ ਜੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤਧਾਰੀ ਹੁੰਦਾ। ਅਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕੀ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅਡੋਪਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਇਸ ਵੇਲੇ। ਮੈਂ ਸੋਚਦਾ ਕਿ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲਾਂ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਸਾਰੇ ਸ਼ਹਿਰਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਣੀਆਂ ਹੈ। ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਭਾਈ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਸੀਗਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬੈਕ ਮੋਤਾ ਸੋਹਣ ਚੇਅਰਮੈਨ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਸੀ, ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਇਹ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤਾ ਆ, ਇਟਸ ਡਿਫੀਕਲਟ। ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਏਰੀਆ ਵਾਈਜ਼ ਡਿਊਟੀ ਦੇਈਏ, ਯੂ ਗਿਵ ਅਸ ਕਪਲ ਪੀਪਲ ਹੂ ਵਿਲ ਰੈਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ, ਅਤੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਉਹ ਬਿਲਡਅਪ ਕਰੀਏ 12 13 14 ਬੰਦੇ ਹੋਣ। ਅਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਉਹ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੰਡੀਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਉਹ ਲਿਖੇ ਹੋਣ। ਹੀ ਮਸਟ ਬੀ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ, ਹੀ ਮਸਟ ਬੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟਿਸਿੰਗ ਸਿੱਖ, ਹੀ ਮਸਟ ਨੋ ਦ ਬੇਸਿਕਸ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਆ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸਾਰੀਆਂ, ਹੁਣ ਟਿਪਕਲ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਆ ਉਹ ਆਪਣੇ ਪਿੰਡ ਬੈਠੇ ਬੋਲਵਿੰਦਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 12 ਸਾਲ ਦਾ ਬੱਚਾ ਅੰਮ੍ਰਿਤ ਛਕ ਕੇ ਆ ਗਿਆ, ਕਿਰਪਾਨ ਪਾਈ ਆ ਗ੍ਰਾਮਰ ਸਕੂਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਔਰ ਮਾਸਟਰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੋ ਹੁਣ ਕੀ ਕਰਾਂ। ਉੱਤੋਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਪਾਉਂਦਾ, ਲੋਕ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਚਾਕੂ ਆ, ਬਾਕੀ ਮੁੰਡੇ ਲੈ ਜਾਣਾ। ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਟੀਚਰ ਆ, ਦੇ ਡੋਂਟ ਨੋ 5.5K ਹੈ। ਅਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਸਕੂਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਐਜੂਕੇਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਟੂ ਦ ਟੀਚਰਸ, ਟੂ ਦ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਸਟੂਡੈਂਟ ਆ, ਉਹ ਵੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਫਰਜ਼ ਬਣਦਾ। ਪਰ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਐਟ ਦ ਐਂਡ ਆਫ ਦ ਡੇ ਮਨੀ ਟੋਕਸ, ਫੰਡ ਸਾਰੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਕੋਲ ਹੈ, ਅਤੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਫੰਡਸ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਐਜੂਕੇਟ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਵੀ ਆਹ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਬੋਡੀ ਸੈਟਅਪ ਕਰ ਦਿਓ, ਦੇ ਸ਼ੁੱਡ ਬੀ ਪੇਡ। ਇਹਨੂੰ ਹੁਣ ਫ੍ਰੀ ਫੰਡ ਰਹਿਣ ਦਿਓ, ਹੈਵ ਪੇਡ ਪੀਪਲ ਟੂ ਗੋ ਆਊਟ ਟੂ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਹੁਣ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜ਼ਮੀਨ ਇਨ ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ, ਸਕੂਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿਹੜਾ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਰਦਾ, ਕੀ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ, ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਸਿਲੈਕਟ ਕਰਨੇ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਐਜੂਕੇਟ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਰਨਾ। ਵੀ ਨੀਡ ਟੂ ਐਜੂਕੇਟ ਦੇਮ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੀ ਆ। ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਡਿਫੀਕਲਟ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਹੈ। ਜੇ ਕੌਂਸਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਲੀਅਰਸ ਕਰਕੇ 1 2 3 4 10 15 ਬੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਜਾਣ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ then you have a committee ਅਠਾਂ ਦਸਾਂ ਦੀ, they should represent the whole community rather than just one sector.
My last question before my colleagues come in. You mentioned body or some kind of mechanism. Should those people be elected, selected, or put in place on merit?
Well, but that's where the Gurdwara councils come. We got 11 Gurdwaras. They hold Gurdwara council. Una di duty ya who to put forward. Genuinely, not just elected. ਸਾਡੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਟਿਪੀਕਲ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਆਈ ਸੀ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਜੀ ਉਹ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਬਣਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਉਹ ਕੋਈ ਨਾਲ ਦੇ ਬੰਦਾ ਦੇ ਦੇਵਾਂਗੇ ਦੈਟਸ ਐਟੀਟਿਊਡ ਮੈਂ ਕਿਹਾ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਬਣਾਈ ਹੈ ਅੰਬਰੇਲਾ ਬੋਡੀ ਟੂ ਲੇਜ਼ ਵਿਦ ਦ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਸੋ ਵਾਈ ਕਾਂਟ ਯੂ ਫਾਈਂਡ ਅ ਪਰਸਨ ਅਤੇ ਇਹ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਹ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਕੌਂਸਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਲੇਜ਼ ਕਰਨ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੁੱਡ ਬੀ ਏਬਲ ਟੂ ਪ੍ਰੋਵਾਈਡ ਯੂ ਰਾਈਟ ਪਰਸਨ ਅਤੇ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਜੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਬੋਰਨ ਹੀ ਸ਼ੁੱਡ ਬੀ ਇੰਟਲੈਕਚੁਅਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਪਰ and practicing sick and should know the problems. ਜਿਹੜੇ problems ਆਪਾਂ deal ਕਰ ਰਹੇ in the coming, he should know all those problems.
Yes, just on one point. We heard from Avtar Singh ji, we heard from Shamsher Singh. Shamsher Singh raised a very valid point. For example, the community can be very close to, he mentioned the Begum case, where now there's a law that they can take away on substantial grounds, and Baldeep would know that, they can take away the British nationality. So these are, and again what the chair just said, these are very critical policy issues which the community is facing. Now, coming from a constitutional background, and I've been challenging big public policies, why, in terms of what you just mentioned, the council's role, why can't the council move for example, in collaboration with Sikhs in law, Sikhs in academia, for example, if you have to challenge a policy, if you have to think of a policy, address the policy. There was a consultation when the British Nationality Act was being amended. We had no view before the parliament, any committee. When there are other laws which are formulated, we have got no representation. Unless and until we as a community stand up and we address and we give representation before the select committees, before the committees. So my question is from that background and from what you have said, how can the Sikh Council of Gurdwaras, I know both of you are from there, and how can the larger Sikh community move in terms of getting, not elected, but getting more professional help, even if, for example, Sikhs in law would say, we're ready to help you on a pro bono professional basis. So how can you think of a mode or, way of, I want to express it like this, that how can you, if you can suggest a way forward where the ego clash is not there and in the interest of community, because if we are not addressing the policy issues, when we go to the court, we've got nothing, we have said nothing to the government. So how can we do that together, collectively?
You need to create the awareness, and that's you people find out. Especially policy area. You feed it to the Gurdwara Council, and the Gurdwara Council pass it to the Gurdwaras, to the grassroots. Grassroots community need to know what the problem is. They must be aware. अंधेरे ਵਿੱਚ ਰੱਖ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਕਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਣਾ ਪੈਣਾ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਆਹ ਰੂਟੀ. First of all, you got to, it's hard work, but you got to win your way into the Gurdwara councils. Look, we are Sikhs, the council of Sikh law, we will do. And you do the hard work, then pass it to the Gurdwara council, then Gurdwara councils. They pass to the grassroots community. So it's a long way, but eventually it will work because people in the Gurdwara council, they will come forward. They are who are intellectuals. They will say, yes, these people are right, come forward, but initially it's going to be hard work.
Gurnam Singh, I'm a sociology professor at the University of Warwick. I'm also on the executive of the Sikhs in academia, though I'm speaking purely in my own individual capacity here, and I'm giving my own thoughts. And I'm also a journalist, and it's really through my journalism that I want to kind of give some of my understandings. I made a written submission which was really, there was an article that I wrote back in May 2020, which was called Sikh Fragmentation in the UK.
Definitely.
And I wrote this as a result of when there was a COVID crisis, and then we had considerable kind of animosity among Sikh groups who could represent the Sikhs in that. And in fact, the connection with Balloon is, I think Balloon was also chairing some committee, and then there was this row about, who is an authentic Sikh leader, and we know that kind of story. But I actually, in this article, what I try to do is to try to suggest that was just symptomatic of a much deeper malaise within the Sikhs. But just before I do that, I just want to give some figures. Really, we the last census said that there are 600,000 Sikhs in this country, okay? And I'm sure that Dr. Lally will give much more reliable data in terms of what percentage of that group actually attends Gurdwaras. I suspect it's a pretty low percentage regularly, maybe speculate 10%. So the question for us is, how do we represent the 90% that is not involved in Gurdwara spaces? Should we discard them and say, actually, the only concerns we have is what happens in Gurdwaras, or for that matter, what happens to Amritdhari Sikhs, who again would form maybe between 5 to 10% of the population. In which case, we shouldn't be talking about 600,000 Sikhs, yeah? So there is this question as to who is a Sikh. If you look at the Sikh Maryada, I think it's pretty clear. It doesn't say that a Sikh has to look in a certain way or dress a certain way. It says that a Sikh should believe in oneness, ek onkar, believe in the teachings of the Das Gurus and the Guru Granth Sahib as the ultimate authority for Sikhs, and that they should have faith and aspire to be an Amritdhari, but they are not required to be an Amritdhari, and that they have no allegiance to any other faith. Yeah. So if we use this definition, then actually potentially all 600,000 Sikhs in this country could represent the Sikhs in some capacity. If we have another definition, then we get into trouble. And I think that's partly one of the reasons why we have these conflicts, because we say, "Eh, sahi nahi hai." So there's a question about legitimacy, how we actually communicate and engage in that process. And I suppose one of the ways out of that is to say, what are the skill sets that they have? You know, like, surely, I mean, I think Dr. Sabal Singh and also Dr. Avtar Singh said that, oh, Sikh hona chahiye. I think there's no dispute about that. But then, who test kon kara? Who's got the meter? Even if it's an Amritdhari Sikh, who can say this person is genuinely committed to Sikh cause? Because as we know, there are plenty of people in Sikh history who have been Amritdhari Sikhs who have sold the Sikhs down the river. Yeah. So I'm not saying I have a solution to this, or we say anything goes, but we need to think about that. And if we're going to be looking at selecting people on the basis of merit or competence or criteria, we need to be very clear what that criteria is, and is it an inclusive criteria, or is it a criteria that's very exclusive? In which case, is it those exclusive groups that are the Panth? That's another point. And of course, Bhai Gurdas Ji gives us a very clear definition of the Panth, because, for instance, this whole discussion about how do you represent the Panth or the Sikh community. He said, Marya Sikha Jagat vich Nanak Nirmal Panth Nirmal, and you can interpret that philosophically or you can interpret it politically, but we need to have a common interpretation of these things. So that's kind of very basic, and that also then links in with who has authority, decision making, and of course, we saw with the Sarbat Khalsa, which is supposed to be one of the apex kind of institutions of the Panth, setting a parallel structure, so they rejected the Jathedar of the Akal Takht, yeah? To the point where actually very few people actually now respect the authority of the Akal, or the Jathedars of the Akal Takht, because it's been politicized. So therein lies another problem, is where you get legitimation from.
On that point, can I just tease out your views on, for example, worldwide, all Sikhs across the board, we all respect the authority of Akal Takht. Forget the personality. We can criticize them. But Akal Takht as the sort is we all respect. And within that, for example, 750 million Sikhs in the UK, what kind of body they should have, not organizational structure to manage Gurdwara, but to lead Sikhs, morality, ethics, Sikh philosophy, and that of course feeds into government policy in the consultation process. Can you take us into that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I just wanted to give that, because I think that therein lies some of the challenges for us. Of course, we all respect the authority of the Akal Takht, but the authority is always enacted through people. It's not enacted through some kind of magic osmosis. It's acted through people. And the problem is that those institutions have been highly politicized, yeah? And maybe they will always be politicized. So the question for us is, where do we draw our authority from? Do we draw it from these unstable, politicized institutions? In fact, what's happened more recently is that our preachers have been divided, so that, you know, some preachers are called anti-Panthak, but yet they have large followings. I mean, the fragmentation around the excommunication of Ranjit Singh Tadriwala. I'm not a supporter of him, but I'm saying that he has many thousands of followers. So are we representing his followers, or are we saying anybody who follows him is excommunicated from Sikhs, therefore we have no... These are complicated questions, I think, so we do need to figure a way to do that. Now, having said that, coming to the question that we're talking to, again, I feel a sense of deja vu. In the article, I did talk about the way in which we set the Sikh Council UK. I mean, that was a very major piece of work, and it came out of this kind of deliberation. If somebody remember, I used to do a TV program, Banth Time. Many of people in here appeared in that, which was going out to the community and actually in a very open way, debating, just like we're debating now. And out of that, what was really astonishing was there were so many people who were not involved in Gurdwaras or in Panthak organisation who were attending these sessions and saying, we want to be involved and we want to be involved, to the point that we then did a national Panth Time where we had in the Ramgarhia Gurdwara, in Ramgarhia Hall in Birmingham, I think, again, some people were, we had, I would say nearly every Gurdwara was represented there, every Jathebandi was represented there, and we passed a resolution to establish Sikh Council UK. A number of us were tasked to write a constitution, and so we looked at the board of deputies, the Jewish board of deputies, because they seem to resemble most clearly the structure of the Sikhs in terms of we are a faith group, but we are more than that. You know, we are, if you like, an ethnic group. Some people think a Sikh qawm, and therefore you can still be a Sikh without even maybe being religious, secular. That we thought that this was a good structure that would be inclusive, and we developed a structure. But I think the problem arose was that we tried to do what Shamsher Singh was talking about, kind of deliberative democracy, decentralization of power, and kind of consultation processes, and we tried to have representation from it. But inevitably what happened was, I think we had what in political circles they call entryism. And that means that you find small groups of people using mechanisms in order to dominate the group, yeah? I'm not going to mention which groups because I think people can decide. But as a result of that, it alienated others, and the council split. And we got two councils, and then we got others. So I think that the problem is, when we form these groups, we have to also be able to say, I'm not going to get all my way here. In fact, we have to understand the notion of consensus building. And here lies another challenge for us. Is it a Sarvsamti? This is we call, in Sikhi, we call Sarvsamti, yeah? Or is it Bausamti, which is majority, okay? And so we need to think about how do we enact consensus, which is Sarvsamti, in which case, but not everybody can get everything. So I think that's a real issue for us. I think that the last one, in terms of the youth, I think Dr. Sadhu Singh's, I think he's hit the nail on the head. The reality is that the majority of our resources are going into the Gurdwaras. The majority of the Gurdwaras are run by people who have not the skill set to either manage those resources carefully or to represent the Sikhs. And we need to stop that, and we need to look at other ways in which we can begin to use our resources. And one last question I'm going to say, this might seem a bit controversial. I think one of the ways in which we have so much conflict in Gurdwaras is around the legitimate demand for Sikhs for sovereignty, Khalistan. Yeah, Khalistan is a real issue, and it's a legitimate argument to be made. But not all Sikhs support the idea of Khalistan, and they might have lots of different reasons why. There might be ideological differences. They might feel that their future is somewhere else. Third, fourth generation Sikhs might say, actually, I have no kind of identification with. So the question is whether we use Khalistan as a litmus test to see whether somebody is representing the Sikhs or not. And I think we need to find a way to try to kind of resolve that issue. Otherwise, what you'll do is you'll create another body, and then somebody's going to come and say, it could go both ways. And I think that then would immediately result in fragmentation. The allegation that Shamsher Singh, obviously it's true that all states will try to co-opt people, they will try to manage the population. But that doesn't mean that we simply then stay outside of power structures. You know, I think you can do both. You can still be sovereign. You can still have. If we look at the Jews, they're very good at that. They will always talk to government. They will always talk to the mainstream. They're in the position of it, but they're staunchly independently minded as well. So I think that for me, that lacks confidence. You know, I always say that we should be talking to the Indian government and making our case. We shouldn't simply be shouting at them. We should be talking to. We talked to Bloom. In fact, we offered Bloom to come and talk to us. He refused to come to talk to us. And I think that's where we need to go as Sikhs. And there you need commitment to Sikhi, you need jajba, but you need skills as well. And that's basically the way forward, I think. And I don't know whether we train people up. I think we need to develop and nurture the talent. And we also need to try to work with our media, because actually, without the Sikh media, we wouldn't actually be having even these conversations. And it is flagging. So we do need to have a kind of total institutional kind of approach to looking at this, rather than saying this person's the problem or that view is the problem. It's a systemic issue that we need to look at. Every group exists to serve a purpose, you know, and activist groups, there'll be women's groups, and some of their interests could be fed through some kind of body. Some of their interests, but others may not be. They may not want to do that, you know. If you know, and so the question would be, would this body, and I'll use the question of Khalistan because that's the most kind of controversial, that's one that divides people. Would we expect this representative body to be an advocacy body for Khalistan? I don't know. I think that in some senses, you have to, only if you can build a complete consensus amongst that body, can it then, you know, give it. Otherwise, you have to say, what is the kind of consensus? What are the kind of common denominators for the Sikhs? And how can we put pressure on that? And the other issues, leave it to the groups to make, you know, a pressure or their own activism. So it's not a question of usurping their activism. You have to, in a sense, work at both levels. You know, diversity is the essence of all communities, and we're not here to eliminate diversity. That's the game that Shamsher is actually warning us from. Is to try and somehow have a top-down definition, but we do need to be able to extract from below what are those kind of common concerns. And actually, when you talk to Sikhs, Amritdhari, non-Amritdhari, Khalistani, they actually express very similar, and I've seen that through the media. You know, drug addiction, alcohol, violence against women, all of these kind of social issues, poverty, Gurdwara's financial crisis, that actually we deal with on an everyday basis. Yeah?
I've got a couple of questions. In terms of the education, first of all, do you think our youth is concerned about the policy which affects them? Like we heard Shamsher, he said we are very close to Begum's case. Now, that's a policy issue where I've not seen any evidence that any of the Sikh body have represented to the government at that time before the changes in the law, which was going to affect all the British Sikhs. So do you think the youth is concerned about the policy?
They are concerned, but the problem is I think that our organisations are incapable of focusing on those issues. Let me illustrate that. You know, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and, you know, the big concern for Sikhs was racial violence and attacks. Whether it was in the Gurdwaras or your windows being smashed, your turbans being removed at school. Actually, the group that was most active at the time was a group called the Indian Workers Association. They were politically organised, and they would organise demonstrations, anti-racist demonstrations. They were anti-fascist groups. We were part of that. But even today, and so the Begum case was really about the British state and its discriminatory policies, yeah? But when you go to these anti-racist, anti-fascist groups, you find very few Sikhs are involved in that. And, you know, I'm involved in that. And I'm saddened because what it suggests is the youth are somehow not being educated around those issues rather than focusing on maybe aspirational issues around Khalistan, which nobody denies that. But we have to deal with the everyday struggles. So I think that there is a lack of education around racism and how it affects you, how you internalize racism, and that because that affects Sikhs in huge ways.
I'm grateful for the answer. Two more. What do you think? How can the Gurdwara or what the chair asks, any other organization, they can, because of course the evidence that we have heard, everybody needs to work collectively to create awareness. So how can the Gurdwara or other organizations can create awareness? And on that point, for example, there's a policy challenge. So how do you think the Gurdwara or Sikh Council Gurdwara can work with Sikh in law to create policy
Okay.
awareness, because you need
Yeah.
some advice to create policy awareness, and vis-a-vis in case of education.
Yeah.
If you have to spread awareness, how can you get involved with Sikh in academia
Yeah.
so that the Sikh Council Gurdwara or other Gurdwaras can create awareness among the students?
Yeah.
What do you say on that?
Well, I mean, I think can give you good examples, really. Again, one of the good things that the Sikh Council UK did was it began to focus on policy areas. For example, child safeguarding. Yeah, they developed quite detailed. I worked with them. We developed quite, and we had a launch in Parliament as well. And that was to train, go into the Gurdwaras and train the grantees, the committees, and raise awareness about because a lot of the reasons why young people don't want to come to the Gurdwara because they don't feel safe. This is sad to say that they feel insecure, and particularly children. And parents don't want to send their children because these are often very male-dominated spaces. Yeah. So this is how we can work in that space and say, in the Gurdwara, it's not just about katha. If you know, Sikhi is about every aspect of life. Yeah. So we need to broaden the education that's taught, and the danger is, and that's point. I mean, Sadhu Singh talked about £50 grantees. What can somebody who has been institutionalized in India from childhood in some kind of seminary come here and tell us about how we can solve the problems that we're facing in this country? Okay, but we expect them to do that and pay them £50 to do it as well.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਮੇਰਾ ਨਾਂ ਜੋਗਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੈ ਤੇ ਮੈਂ ਤਕਰੀਬਨ ਯੰਗ ਏਜ ਤੋਂ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਤੇ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ 'ਚ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ। ਸੋ ਮੇਰੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਓਪੀਨੀਅਨ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨਾਲ ਡਾਇਲੋਗ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਕੋ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕੇ ਕਿ ਵਧੀਆ ਬੰਦੇ, ਚੰਗੇ ਸਿਆਣੇ ਬੰਦੇ, ਸਕਿੱਲ ਸੈੱਟ ਵਾਲੇ ਮੋਹਰੇ ਆ ਜਾਣ, ਪਰ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ 'ਚੋਂ ਆ ਗਏ। ਸੋ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਫੇਸ ਕਰਦੇ, ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਰਾਦਰ ਦੈਨ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ। ਕਿ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿਸਟਮ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਨੂੰ। ਤਾਂ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੁੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟਿਸ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਦਾ, ਜਦੋਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਬਣੀ ਫੋਰ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ, ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਭਾਈ ਅਮਰੀਕ ਸਿੰਘ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਊਥ ਵੀ, ਮਿਡਲੈਂਡ ਵੀ, ਨੌਰਥ ਵੀ, ਸਾਰੇ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਉਸ ਇਲਾਕੇ ਦੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸੱਦ ਕੇ ਮੀਟਿੰਗਾਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਆ ਕੇ ਵਿਊ ਦੇਵੋ। ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕਿਹਾ ਸੀ ਜੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਕੋਈ ਨਹੀਂ ਵੀ ਆਉਂਦਾ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਇਲਾਕੇ ਦਾ ਸਿਆਣਾ ਆ, ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਵਧੀਆ ਸਕਿੱਲ ਆ, ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਪੜ੍ਹਿਆ ਲਿਖਿਆ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਭੇਜ ਦੇਣ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਜਿਸ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਮੈਂ ਬਿਲੋਂਗ ਕਰਦਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦਾ ਲੰਡਨ ਤੋਂ ਦਿੱਤਾ ਆ ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਕਰਕੇ ਹੀ ਵਧੀਆ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ। ਜਾਣੀ ਡਜ਼ਨਟ ਮੈਟਰ ਐਜ਼ ਲੌਂਗ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਹੁੰਦਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਉਹ ਸਕਿੱਲ ਸੈੱਟ ਰਾਈਟ ਹੋਵੇ। ਅਤੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਸਿੱਖਸ ਇਨ ਲੋ ਜਾਂ ਸਿੱਖਸ ਅਕੈਡਮੀ ਆ, ਇਹ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾਯੋਗ ਉਦਮ ਆ, ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ ਆ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਸੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਕੀਲ, ਸਾਡੇ ਡਾਕਟਰ, ਸਾਡੀ ਪੜ੍ਹੀ ਲਿਖੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਕਿਉਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਇਸ਼ੂਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੋਹਰੇ ਚੱਕ ਰਹੀ। ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖਣਾ, ਹੁਣ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਡਿਸਪੁਆਇੰਟਮੈਂਟਸ ਵੀ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਹੋਣੀਆਂ। ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕੁਛ ਕਹਿਣਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕੁਛ ਕਹਿਣਾ, ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕੁਛ ਕਹਿਣਾ। ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਜੇ ਤਾਂ ਮਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਉੱਨਤੀ, ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਤਰੱਕੀ, ਕੌਮ ਦੀ ਬੈਟਰਮੈਂਟ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ, ਦੈਨ ਵੀ ਕਾਂਟ ਗਿਵ ਅਪ। ਐਂਡ ਯੂ ਬਲੀਵ ਮੀ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਇੰਸੀਡੈਂਟ ਆਉਣੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਵਾਈ ਐਮ ਵੇਸਟਿੰਗ ਮਾਈ ਟਾਈਮ, ਮੈਂ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਕਿਤੇ ਵਧੀਆ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ। ਸੋ ਆ ਗਿਵ ਅਪ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੀ ਬੈਟਰਮੈਂਟ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਗੁੱਡ ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟਿਸ ਮੈਂ ਦੱਸੀ ਆ, ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਇਲਾਕਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਨਾਊਂਸਮੈਂਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਗੈਦਰਿੰਗ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਨਵਾਈਟ ਕਰੀਏ। ਹੁਣ ਇਹ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ, ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਲੋਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਏ। ਜੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਹੋਵੇ, ਫੋਰ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਿਲੇਟਡ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਹੈ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਆ, ਜੇ ਦੂਜੇ ਨੂੰ ਦੂਜੇ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਆ। ਪਰ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਟੂ ਅਵੋਇਡ ਦੈਟ ਦਾ ਕੀਤਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਵੀ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਾ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪ੍ਰਬੰਧਕ ਆ, ਤਾਂ ਲੋਕ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਆ ਜਾਣੇ, ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਸਕੂਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਹੋਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਆਮ ਪਬਲਿਕ ਇਹ ਵੈਲ ਪਬਲਿਸਾਈਡ ਹੋ ਜਾਵੇ, ਟੈਲੀਵਿਜ਼ਨ 'ਤੇ, ਰੇਡੀਓ 'ਤੇ, ਫਿਰ ਆਮ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਆ ਜਾਵੇ। ਦੂਸਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੁਛ ਮੇਰੇ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਬੁਲਾਰੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਕੇ ਗਏ ਵੀ ਹਰ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਕੰਟਰੀਬਿਊਸ਼ਨ ਕਰਦੇ, ਪਰ ਇੱਕ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲਿਖ ਕੇ ਦੇ ਸਕਦਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਬਰਮਿੰਘਮ ਦੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ, ਨੈਵਰ ਮਾਈਂਡ ਸਾਡੇ ਯੂਕੇ ਦੇ ਹੋਣੇ ਆ। ਐਜ਼ ਲੌਂਗ ਕਾਫੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਹਿਮਤ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਹੋਣੇ। ਇਟ ਵਿਲ ਨੈਵਰ ਹੈਪਨ ਇਨ ਦ ਹਿਸਟਰੀ। ਜਾਣੀ ਇਹ ਪੋਸੀਬਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ। ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਹੋਇਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ, ਦੂਜੇ ਨੇ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ, ਪਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਆਉਣਾ ਕੌਮ ਲਈ, ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਣਾ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਬੀੜਾ ਚੱਕਿਆ, ਮੈਂ ਇਹਦੀ ਸ਼ਲਾਘਾ ਕਰਦਾ, ਤਾਂ ਹਿੰਮਤ ਨਹੀਂ ਹਾਰਨੀ। ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਵਿਚਰਦਾ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਹਰ ਮਸਲਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਬਣਾਇਆ ਜਿੱਤੇ ਸਿਟੀਜ਼ਨ ਬਸ ਉੱਤੇ ਵੀ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਸਾਰੇ ਐਮਪੀਆਂ ਨਾਲ ਵੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ। ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਕੈਨੇਡਾ ਦਾ ਮਸਲਾ ਹੋਇਆ, ਹੁਣ ਸਿੱਖ ਫੈਡਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਨੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਮੈਂਬਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਿੱਠੀਆਂ ਦਿੱਤੀਆਂ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਹ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਐਮਪੀ ਨੂੰ ਪਾਓ, ਆਪਣੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੇ ਲੈਟਰ ਪੈਡ 'ਤੇ। ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤੇ ਆ, ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕੇ। ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਮੇਰੇ ਖਿਆਲ 10 ਜਾਂ 15 ਹੋਣੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਪਾਈਆਂ। ਸੋ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਕਿੱਲ ਸੈਟ ਬੈਟਰ ਕਰਨਾ ਪੈਣਾ। ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀ ਤਕੜੀ ਉਹਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਬਣਦਾ, ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਮਸਲ ਪਾਵਰ ਜਾਓ ਬਣਦਾ। ਹੁਣ ਕਈ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਵੱਡੇ ਆ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ, ਇੰਗਲਿਸ਼ ਤੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਕੀ ਕੌਮ ਦਾ ਸਵਾਰਨਗੇ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਲੈਣਾ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਸੀ। ਦੇ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟਡ ਬਿਗਰ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ। ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਕਿੱਲ ਸੈੱਟ ਦੇ ਮਗਰ ਜਾਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਕੇਪੇਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਮਗਰ ਜਾਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੇ ਸਾਈਜ਼ 'ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਾਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ। ਔਰ ਜੇ ਮੇਰੇ 'ਚ ਕੇਪੇਬਿਲਿਟੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹ 'ਚ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਆਪਣੇ ਥਾਂ ਭੇਜੀਏ, ਉਹ 'ਚ ਕੌਮ ਦਾ ਭਲਾ ਹੋਣਾ। ਇਟਸ ਨਾਟ ਵੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਮੈਂ ਹੋਣਾ ਜਾਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਹੋਣਾ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਹੋਣਾ। ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ 'ਚ, ਆਪਾਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਏਰੀਏ 'ਚ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਬੈਟਰ ਸਕਿਲਡ ਬੰਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹ ਕੇਪੇਬਲ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ। ਤਾਂ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ 2 ਕੌਂਸਲਾਂ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਹੋਰ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਕਾਫੀ ਆ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਹੁਣ ਕਈਆਂ ਨੇ ਬਲੂਮ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ 'ਤੇ ਵੀ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਬਟ ਨੋਬਡੀ ਨੋਜ਼ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀ ਲਿਖਿਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕੀ ਲਿਖਿਆ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ। ਜਦੋਂ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਕੋਲੋਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ 3-4 ਵਰਜ਼ਨਸ ਆਉਣੀਆਂ, ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਦੇ ਨਾਟ ਟੋਕਿੰਗ ਟੂ ਈਚ ਅਦਰ। ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਉੱਥੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਰਗੀ ਸੰਸਥਾ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਰਲੀਏ, ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਇਕੱਠਾ ਕਰਕੇ ਕਾਨੂੰਨੀ ਪੱਖ ਤੋਂ ਲੀਗਲੀ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਐਨ ਠੀਕ ਕਰਕੇ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ। ਬਟ ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਦੂਜੀਆਂ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਨਵਾਈਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੁਣ ਨਹੀਂ ਆਈਆਂ, ਮੈਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਅਪੀਲ ਕਰਦਾ ਦੁਬਾਰਾ ਸੋਚਣ। ਦੇ ਡੋਂਟ ਹੈਵ ਟੂ ਅਗਰੀ ਵਿਦ ਦਿਸ ਫੁਲੀ, ਬਟ ਐਟਲੀਸਟ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੌਮੀ ਮਸਲੇ ਆ ਜੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਰਲ ਕੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰੀਏ, ਵੀ ਗੈਟ ਬੈਟਰ ਰਿਜ਼ਲਟ। ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ 5-6 ਬੰਦੇ ਆ, ਵੋਂਟ ਮੈਂਸ਼ਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਨੇਮ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ, ਐਂਡ ਸਾਰੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਵੱਖਰੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਆ। ਫਿਰ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਸੋਚਦੀ ਹੈ ਵੱਲ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਆਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਆਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ, ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਆਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ। ਸੋ ਉਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਜੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਆਪਣੀ ਸਲਾਹ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਹੀ ਨਹੀਂ। ਸੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮਸਲਾ ਹੱਲ ਕਰਨ, ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ 2 ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲਾਂ ਦਿੰਦਾ। ਜਦੋਂ ਯੂਰਪ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦਸਤਾਰਾਂ ਏਅਰਪੋਰਟ 'ਤੇ ਲਾਉਣ ਲੱਗ ਪਏ, ਉਦੋਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਨੇ ਯੂਰਪੀਅਨ ਯੂਨੀਅਨ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ, ਉਹ ਮਸਲਾ ਬਹੁਤ 80-90% ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਪਲੱਸ ਹੱਲ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ। ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਕੰਮ 'ਤੇ ਹਾਰਡ ਹੈਟ ਦਾ ਮਸਲਾ ਹੋਇਆ, ਉੱਤੇ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕੀਤੀ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਹੱਲ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਸਾਰੇ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਕੀਤੀ। ਜਦੋਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਰਿਜ਼ਲਟ ਇਜ਼ ਗਰੰਟੀਡ, ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿੱਤਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਜਦੋਂ ਆਪਾਂ 5-6 ਗਰੁੱਪਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਆਪਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਜਿੱਤਣਾ। ਹੋਰ ਕਕਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਇਸ਼ੂ 'ਤੇ ਵੀ ਕੰਮ ਕਾਫੀ ਹੋਇਆ। ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇਸ਼ੂ 'ਤੇ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵਲੀ ਯੂਕੇ ਦੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੇ ਕੰਮ ਕੀਤਾ, ਉਹਦੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਜਿੱਤੇ ਹਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਤੱਕ। ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਕੰਮ 'ਚ ਅਜੇ ਤੱਕ ਫੇਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਏ। ਸੋ ਇਹਦੇ ਲਈ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਵੀ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਨਾ ਕੋਈ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀ ਬਣਦੀ ਆ, ਕੋਈ ਸੰਸਥਾ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਬਣਦੀ ਆ, ਜਿਸ 'ਚੋਂ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਭਾਗ ਲੈਂਦੀਆਂ, ਉਹ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਆ ਡਰਾਈਵਿੰਗ ਸੀਟ 'ਤੇ ਮੇਰਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਬੈਠਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਬੇਸ਼ੱਕ ਦੀ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਡਰਾਈਵਿੰਗ ਨਾ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੋਵੇ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਐਕਸੀਡੈਂਟ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ ਚਾਂਸਿਸ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਹੋਣ। ਐਂਡ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਚਿਰ ਇਹ ਸੋਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਦਲਦੀ ਵੀ ਵੋਂਟ ਸਕਸੀਡ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕੇਪੇਬਲ ਬੰਦਾ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਸਮੇਂ ਲਈ 6 ਮਹੀਨਿਆਂ ਲਈ, ਸਾਲ ਲਈ 5-4 ਜਿਹੜੇ ਕੇਪੇਬਲ ਬੰਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ। ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਬੰਦਾ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਸਿਧਾਂਤ 5 ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨੀ ਆ, ਜਦੋਂ 5-7 ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦੇ ਚੁਣੇ ਇੰਗਲੈਂਡ 'ਚੋਂ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਆ ਸਿਆਣੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੇਪੇਬਲ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟ ਕਰਨ ਦੇ, ਜਦੋਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਸਾਂਝੀ ਇੱਕ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦੇਣ, ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਸੁਣੇਗੀ, ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਮੰਨੇਗੀ।
ਕਲੈਰਿਟੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਥੋੜੀ ਸਪਸ਼ਟ ਹੈਗੀ ਕਿ ਆਪਣੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਚਾਹੇ 300-400 ਜਿੰਨੇ ਵੀ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵੱਖਰੇ ਡਾਇਵਰਸ ਆਪੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਇੰਤਜ਼ਾਮ ਹੈਗੇ ਆ, ਆਪੋ ਆਪਣੀ ਗਰੁੱਪਿੰਗ ਆ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਹੈਗਾ। ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਹਾਇਤਾ ਸਹਿਯੋਗ ਲਈ ਯਤਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ, ਪਰ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਕੱਠੋ ਕਰਕੇ ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਤੋਰਿਆ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ,
ਨਹੀਂ, possible
ਇੰਪੋਸੀਬਲ ਹੈ। ਦੂਜੀ ਗੱਲ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ, ਜਿਵੇਂ ਸਹੀ ਸਮਝਿਆ, ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਆਪੋ ਆਪਣੇ ਤੌਰ ਤੇ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਸਕੀਆਂ, ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਇੰਡੀਵਿਜੂਅਲ ਜਾਂ ਗਰੁੱਪਸ ਅਪਾਇੰਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਐਕਟੀਵੇਟ ਕਰਕੇ ਤੇ ਮੋਹਰੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਹਾਇਤਾ ਲਈ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ
ਜੀ
ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਆਪਰੇਟ ਕਰੀ ਜਾਣਾ,
ਜੀ
ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਉਹ ਚਾਹੇ ਕੰਪੀਟੀਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ, ਚਾਹੇ ਕੋਲੈਬੋਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੈ, ਚਾਹੇ ਜਿਵੇਂ ਵੀ ਹੈਗਾ, ਉਹ ਕੁਛ ਨਾ ਕੁਛ ਇਹਦਾ ਦੋਹਾਂ ਪਾਸਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਕੋਲੈਬੋਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਲੋਕਲਾਈਜ਼ ਜਾਂ ਰੀਜਨਲਾਈਜ਼ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਓਵਰਆਲ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ।
ਜੀ
ਇਸ ਸੂਰਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਸੁਜੈਸਟ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਆਪਣਾ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਮੈਕੈਨਿਜ਼ਮ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਤਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿਚਾਲੇ ਇੱਕ ਬ੍ਰਿਜਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਸਕੇ, ਜਿਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਕੰਸਲਟੇਸ਼ਨ, ਉਹਦੀ ਰਿਫਾਈਨਮੈਂਟ, ਉਹ ਭਾਈਚਾਰੇ ਦੀਆਂ ਲੋੜਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਮੋਹਰੇ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਅਗਾਂਹ ਤੁਰਿਆ ਜਾਵੇ। ਇਹ ਸਹੀ ਹੈ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ?
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਇਹੀ ਕਹਿ ਰਹੇ।
ਠੀਕ ਆ, ਥੈਂਕ ਯੂ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਕੁਛ?
ਮੈਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਭਾਈ ਜੋਗਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਹੋਣੀ ਕਾਫੀ ਕਲੋਜ਼ ਸੀਗਾ, ਆਪ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਸਭ ਕੁਛ ਲਾਗੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਦੇਖਿਆ। ਸੋ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਸੀਗਾ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਬਲਿਕਲੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਟ੍ਰਾਂਸਪੇਰੈਂਸੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਹੈ, ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਵਿਡ ਕ੍ਰਾਈਸਿਸ ਆਈ ਸੀ ਤਾਂ ਉਦੋਂ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨੇ ਜਸਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ, ਬੈਰਿਸਟਰ ਜਸਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਆਰਚ ਬਿਸ਼ਪ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਪਾਇੰਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਰੈਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਟਿਵ ਹੈ। ਉਦੋਂ ਵੀ ਕਾਫੀ ਫਾਲ ਆਊਟ ਵੀ ਹੋਈ, ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੀ ਹੈ ਸਭ ਕੁਝ, ਜਿਸ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਬਲੂਮ ਨੇ ਵੀ ਰਿਪੋਰਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੀ ਸੋ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਸੀ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੀਗੇ ਉਦੋਂ, ਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੀ ਸਮਝਦੇ ਆ ਵੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਇਹ ਸਟੈਪ ਕਿਉਂ ਚੁੱਕੀ ਸੀਗੀ? ਤਾਂ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਇੱਕ ਸਮੇਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੌਂਸਲ ਦਾ ਵਰਕਰ ਦੀ ਪਾਰਲੀਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੈਠਾ ਸੀ
ਜੀ
ਉੱਥੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤਾਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਤੱਕ ਮਿਆਰ ਤੇ ਕੱਢ ਗਈ।
ਬਸ ਹੀ ਆਪਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੀ ਅੰਡਰਸਟੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣੀ, ਸਾਰੇ ਸੇਮ ਲੈਵਲ ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ, ਪਰ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਹੱਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਵੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦਾ ਉਹ ਚੁਣੇ। ਇਟਸ ਰੋਂਗ। ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦਾ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦਾ ਸਿੱਖ ਚੁਣ, ਸਿੱਖ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀਆਂ, ਸਿੱਖ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ, ਸਿੱਖ ਸੰਗਤ ਪ੍ਰਵਾਨਗੀ ਦੇਣ, ਆ ਸਾਡੇ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦੇ ਆ, ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨਹੀਂ। ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਉਹ ਚੁਣਨੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੀ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਜੀ ਹਜ਼ੂਰੀ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ। ਵੀ ਨਾਟ ਟੋਕਿੰਗ ਅਬਾਊਟ ਜਸਵੀਰ ਸਿੰਘ, ਜਿਹਨੂੰ ਵੀ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਚੁਣੇਗੀ ਉਹ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਚੁਣੇਗੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਹਿਮਤੀ ਕਰੇਗਾ ਹਰ ਮੁੱਦੇ 'ਤੇ। ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤਾਂ ਚਾਪਲੂਸ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ ਆ, ਸਿੱਖ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਪਲੂਸ ਨਹੀਂ ਚਾਹੀਦੇ। ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਨੁਮਾਇੰਦਾ ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰੇ ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਲਾਹ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰੇ, ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪ੍ਰਵਾਨ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਇਸ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਅਥਾਰਟੀ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ।
ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਕਾਉਂਸਲ ਦੀ ਇੰਨੀ ਉਹਦੀ ਕਮਜ਼ੋਰੀ ਸੀ ਕਰਕੇ ਹਿੰਮਤ ਕੀਤੀ?
ਕਰਕੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸਾਰੇ ਇੱਕ ਪਲੇਟਫਾਰਮ 'ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਮੈਂ ਤਾਂ ਇਹੀ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ, ਜਦੋਂ ਇੱਕ ਪਲੇਟਫਾਰਮ 'ਤੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਣਾ, ਗੌਰਮੈਂਟ ਨੂੰ ਅਪਰਚੂਨਿਟੀ ਮਿਲਦੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਕੋਈ ਆਪਣਾ ਬੰਦਾ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਫੇਵਰੇਬਲ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਉਹ ਜ਼ਿੰਮੇਵਾਰੀ ਦੇ ਦੇ।
ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਸਹੀ ਸਮਝਿਆ, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਚਾਹੁੰਦੇ ਹੋ ਕਿ ਗਵਰਨਮੈਂਟ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੋ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਏ ਕੌਮ ਦੀ, ਉਹ ਯੂਨੀਫਾਈਡ ਅਪਰੋਚ ਹੋਏ।
ਜੀ
ਬਟ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੇਸੀ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ, ਚਾਰ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਅਲੱਗ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ, ਐਂਡ ਵੀ ਨੀਡ ਟੂ ਐਕਸੈਪਟ ਦੈਟ ਐਂਡ ਆਨਰ ਦੈਟ। ਫਰੋਮ ਦੈਟ ਪਰਸਪੈਕਟਿਵ ਮੈਂ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਚਾਹੁੰਦਾ, ਜੇ ਇੱਕ ਲੀਏਜ਼ਨ ਮੈਕੈਨਿਜ਼ਮ ਬਣੇ ਐਂਡ ਆਪਾਂ ਜੇ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਮੈਜੋਰਿਟੀ ਵਿਊ ਫੇਵਰੇਬਲ ਹੋਏ, ਫੋਰ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਜਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਲੀਗਲ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਉੱਤੇ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ, ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਐਕਸਪਰਟਸ ਦੀ ਕਰੋ, ਸੈਕੰਡ ਲਾਅ ਆ ਗਿਆ, ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਕੋਈ ਹੋਰ ਵੀ ਵਕੀਲ ਆ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ। ਐਜੂਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸੈਕੰਡ ਅਕੈਡਮੀਆ ਆ ਗਿਆ, ਔਰ ਵੀ ਟੀਚਰਸ ਆ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ, ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸਰਸ ਆ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ। ਬਟ ਟੇਕਿੰਗ ਇਨਟੂ ਅਕਾਊਂਟ ਕਿ ਇਹ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਗਰੁੱਪ ਬਣ ਗਿਆ ਹੈ ਜਿਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਕਸਪਰਟ ਬੰਦੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਨੇ, ਜੇ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਇੱਕ ਲੀਏਜ਼ਨ ਮੈਕੈਨਿਜ਼ਮ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨਾਲ ਬਣੇ ਐਂਡ ਟੇਕਿੰਗ ਦਾ ਸਪਿਰਿਟ ਆਫ ਕਲੈਕਟਿਵ ਡੈਮੋਕ੍ਰੇਸੀ, ਹੋ ਸਕਦਾ ਸਾਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਨਣ, ਬਿਕੋਜ਼ ਕੋਈ ਬੰਦਾ ਕੁਛ ਸਾਰੇ ਦੇ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਐਸਪੀਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ, ਬਟ ਜੇ ਮੈਜੋਰਿਟੀ ਵੀ ਮੰਨੇ, ਸਾਡਾ ਕੰਸੈਪਟ ਹੈ ਪੰਜ ਪਿਆਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ, ਐਂਡ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਵੀ ਉਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਹੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, ਅਤੇ ਜੇ ਮੈਜੋਰਿਟੀ ਵੀ ਬਣੇ, ਵਾਟ ਡੂ ਯੂ ਥਿੰਕ ਇਨ ਕੀ ਓਬਜ਼ਰਵੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੋਗੇ, ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮੈਜੋਰਿਟੀ ਵਿਊ, ਇਹ ਨਾ ਸੋਚੋ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਕੰਸੈਂਸਸ ਬਣੂਗਾ, ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣੂਗਾ, ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟੀਕਲੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਬਣੂਗਾ, ਹੈ ਨਾ। ਅਤੇ ਜੇ ਮੈਜੋਰਿਟੀ ਵਿਊ ਅਤੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੋਨ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਹਾਂ, ਅਤੇ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਕੀ ਰਿਕਮੈਂਡੇਸ਼ਨ ਹੋਏ ਕਿ ਕਿਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਇਕੱਠਾ ਹੋ ਕਰ ਵਿਊ ਆਏ। ਕਿਉਂਕਿ ਮੈਂ ਹਿਸਟੋਰਿਕਲੀ ਪਿਛਲੇ 15 ਸਾਲ ਤੋਂ, ਜਦੋਂ 18,600 ਦੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਦੀ ਆਈ ਕਿ ਜੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਬੱਚੇ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਬੱਚੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਸ਼ਾਦੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਨੇ, ਦੇ ਹੈਵ ਟੂ ਬ੍ਰਿੰਗ ਦੇ ਸਪਾਊਸਸ ਫਰੋਮ ਅਬਰੋਡ, ਕੋਈ ਸਾਡਾ ਰਿਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਨਹੀਂ ਸੀ। ਸਾਡਾ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ, ਉਹ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਮੈਂ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ, ਉਹ ਕਿ ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਕੋਰਟ ਤੱਕ ਗਿਆ ਸੀ, ਉਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਕੋਰਟ ਨੇ ਜਸਟਿਸ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ। ਉਹਨੇ ਰਵਾਂਡਾ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਆਈ, ਉਸ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਡੀਆ ਦੇ ਵੀ ਬੱਚੇ ਨੇ ਜੋ ਅਸਾਈਲਮ ਕਲੇਮ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ, ਕੋਈ ਵਿਊ ਸਾਡਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਿਆ। ਹੁਣੇ ਨੈਸ਼ਨੈਲਿਟੀ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤੀ, ਸੁਪਰੀਮ ਕੋਰਟ ਕੇਸ ਪੈਂਡਿੰਗ ਹੈ। ਹੁਣੇ ਸ਼ਮਸ਼ੇਰ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਸਪੀਕਰਸ ਨੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸੁਣ ਰਹੇ ਸੀ ਨੈਸ਼ਨੈਲਿਟੀ ਐਕਟ ਅਮੈਂਡਮੈਂਟ, ਕੋਈ ਵਿਊ ਸਾਡਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਿਆ। ਥੋੜੇ ਗਏ ਬਟ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ, ਮੈਂ ਸਟੱਡੀ ਕਰ ਰਿਹਾ, ਬਟ nobody has taken account of that। ਉਹ ਜਿੰਨਾ ਫੋਰਸਫੁਲ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਸੀ ਟੇਕਿੰਗ ਇਨਟੂ ਅਕਾਊਂਟ ਆ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਸਾਈਜ਼, ਉਹ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਿਆ। ਉਸ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਸਜੈਸ਼ਨ ਚੇਅਰ ਨੂੰ ਦਿਓ, ਕੀ ਕਰਾ ਜਾ ਸਕਦਾ ਮੈਜੋਰਿਟੀ ਦਾ, ਕਿ ਵੀ ਕੈਨ ਹੈਵ ਇਫੈਕਟਿਵ ਕਮਿਊਨੀਕੇਸ਼ਨ।
ਜਦੋਂ ਕੋਈ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਓਬਵੀਅਸਲੀ ਉੱਥੇ ਤਾਂ ਵਕੀਲਾਂ ਦੀ ਲੋੜ ਪੈਣੀ ਆ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕਾਨੂੰਨ ਦਾ ਪਤਾ। ਹੁਣ ਹੋਰ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨ ਵਾਲੇ ਆ, ਜੇ ਉਹਨੀ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ, ਦੇ ਡੋਂਟ ਹੈਵ ਏ ਲੀਗਲ ਬੈਕਗਰਾਊਂਡ। ਸੋ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਫੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਮਦਦ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੀ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਚਿੱਠੀ ਪੱਤਰ, ਜਿਹੜਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਰਿਪਰਜੈਂਟੇਸ਼ਨ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰਨੀ ਆ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਉਸ ਫੀਲਡ ਦੇ ਮਾਹਰ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਨਾਲ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਬੈਟਰ ਰਿਸਪੌਂਸ ਮਿਲੇਗਾ। ਸੋ ਇਹ ਮੈਂ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਸਹਿਮਤ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ ਸਰਬਸੰਮਤੀ, ਪਰ ਪੋਸੀਬਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਐਜ਼ ਲੌਂਗ ਕਾਫੀ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਮੈਜੋਰਿਟੀ ਸੋਚਦੀ ਵੀ ਯਾਰ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ। ਬਾਕੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਕਨਸੈਪਟ ਯਾਦ ਰੱਖਣ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਵੀ ਐਗਰੀ ਟੂ ਡਿਸਐਗਰੀ। ਮੈਂ ਇਸ ਗੱਲ 'ਤੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਹਿਮਤ ਨਹੀਂ, ਕਰਕੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਗਿਣਤੀ ਸਹਿਮਤ ਆ, ਇਹ 'ਚ ਕੋਈ ਏਡਾ ਵੱਡਾ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਦਿੰਦਾ, ਫਿਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਉਹਦੀ ਵਿਰੋਧਤਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਵੀ ਚਲੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਬਾਕੀ ਜੇ ਭਰਾ ਸੋਚਦੇ ਆ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਆਈ ਸ਼ੁੱਡ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਦਮ। ਮੇ ਬੀ ਪਰਸਨਲੀ ਮੈਂ ਸੋਚਦਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਠੀਕ, ਪਰ ਐਜ਼ ਲੌਂਗ ਬਿਗ ਪਾਰਟ ਆਫ ਦਾ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਸੋਚਦੀ ਹੈ ਠੀਕ ਹੈ, ਫਿਰ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਹਦੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰਨੀ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ।
And it is heartwarming to see this initiative. I'm sure you have received more objections than support, and I trust that this will not deter the panel in their deliberations. I believe that most of the issues that I will highlight have already been emphasised by much more qualified friends than myself. So please take my views as another angle and voice which lays further emphasis on the issues under consideration. My name is Dr. Hajinder Singh Lally. I'm happy to be recorded. I'm a university reader at the University of Warwick. My specialist area is cybersecurity, within which I specialise in digital forensics. I also hold a visiting lectureship at the University of Oxford. I do not speak on behalf of my employer today. I am the chair of Sikhs in Academia, and I begin by outlining who Sikhs in Academia is before moving on to answering two of the questions that you have asked in your call. Sikhs in Academia were formed in June 2023. Our members are staff and students at university. They work in a critical UK sector comprising more than 2.25 million students and staff, representing around £46 billion of the UK market share in 2021-2022. Our members are primarily UK based, but we are seeing a rise in membership from North America and North India. There's a lot of interest in what we do. Our members teach students, they assess their work, they provide pastoral support. Students approach us with a wide range of issues, from initial access to the university, progression through studies, many welfare issues. We are the one group that is the closest and most intricately involved with student affairs, because we're there, we're on the ground every day. Over the past 4 years, our academic members have fielded a dramatic rise in mental health issues amongst the student body. And in our view, this is a serious and growing problem amongst the student population. I raise this point because this is an issue of representation which our existing bodies have failed to represent. The student body are a significant group. They are the future of our community. Our committee comprises a cross-section of universities, both professors, academics, students as well, who lead our student exec. We have ensured that the student voice is strongly represented within our community. And this is, again, an illustration of needing to have that cross-section of voices, cross-section of genders. Not everyone on our committee is Amritdhari. They're all in different points of their religious journey and their spiritual journey. And to be quite frank, it's not a question we ask when someone joins our committee. We aim to support our members around issues affecting them, such as career progression, employment representation, issues affecting equal rights, but most importantly, to help them project their voice. So we are here today talking about representation, and Sikhs are, in my view, very poorly represented in academia. The research that Sikhs in academia have undertaken so far reveals that in the UK there are no Sikh vice-chancellors. There is one pro-vice-chancellor, no deans, several associate deans, 1,200 lecturers, of whom 2/3 are female, which is absolutely brilliant, but that's still not a high enough number. And collectively, we form 0.3% of the UK academic population, which is disproportionate to the actual population in the UK. But more worryingly, just 0.03% of the PhD community are Sikh. So that is a serious problem for the future intellectual growth of our community. What I'm also worried about is that in 140 or so universities, there are just 20 Sikh chaplains. 20 Sikh chaplains available to answer issues and concerns faced by our students within those universities. And I have another concern as well, and that is that most of the effort in the Sikh community seems to be focused on increasing Sikh representation in Sikh studies PhDs, with absolutely no effort to increase Sikh representation in other disciplines. So I'm now going to turn to the questions you've asked the witnesses to answer. And in my response, I'm going to be referring a lot to the grassroots Sikh community. This is and we've heard it already today, this is the approximately 90 to 95% of our community who do not go to the Gurdwara on a regular basis and do not care for the political struggles within the Gurdwara and beyond. In fact, they find these struggles to be quite toxic. They can be excused for believing that the existing so-called representation mechanisms are failing them. So, I'm only going to answer 2 questions, and the first question I'm going to answer is, are there barriers or opportunities within current representation mechanisms? And panel and chair, these have been answered already, but I'm just adding further support and maybe another angle. Let me begin with representation of Sikh academics within these groups that claim to represent the Sikh community. I do not believe that the broader cross-discipline of Sikh academia have hitherto been adequately represented or consulted in any of their consultations. I do accept that religious studies scholars are occasionally consulted. However, academics from other fields such as STEM, maths, statistics, social work, psychology, law, who have expertise in these areas, who work in these areas on a daily basis as their profession, who teach these skills not just to students but also to industry, are rarely consulted. The point being that there's a huge talent pool out there that we are completely ignoring. And I'll come back to that issue in my next point. I do not believe that many of the existing groups have a transparent and or effective mechanism for consulting that grassroots Sikh community. I believe that representatives are often deliberately excluded, and I believe that some existing groups practice both conscious and unconscious bias. So unconscious bias is a problem in itself, but what I think we're seeing is active conscious bias, that we're deliberately going to exclude that group or that person or those views because they're not the views we want to represent in this consultation. Existing groups that claim to represent the Sikh community appear to be formed around jathebandik and political lines and influences. Some are the products of fallouts with their parent organizations, and the overriding concerns and agendas of these groups appear to be motivated by these jathebandik and political issues. One thing that I wanted to outline right at the beginning is that Sikhs in academia is not jathebandik, and we are not political. We are, as I say, a cross-discipline. And then finally on that issue, the issues that I've just described naturally alienate large elements of that grassroots Sikh community. They feel disconnected with the fundamental constructs and aims of these groups. it feels to that grassroots community that these groups are not representing their issues and their views. To quote a few examples, issues facing Sikh students, we have hundreds, thousands of Sikh students coming in now from the Punjab who have actually nowhere to stay. They were inadequately prepared for financing their studies. They were inadequately advised. They've arrived in the UK. On a daily basis, we see posts on Instagram saying, I'm desperate for a house, or there's a group of us. And I mean, the issues are endless. And no one is kind of listening to that group. No one is representing that particular group. But you could argue, well, that's your job, Sikhs in academia. But I'm just using that as an example. Let me give you a few more. Issues relating to immigrations, issues relating to employment matters, issues relating to the growing elderly Sikh population who are more concerned with where they will live, who will care for them, and not concerned about the Jathebandik political issues that these groups are actually concerned with. That's what they're concerned with. So as an example of projects we're involved with, because we are concerned with a whole wide range of issues that affect our community, we've run 2 collaborations with the University of Birmingham in the areas of psychological support, domestic abuse, job satisfaction concerning those of Sikh heritage. And that's what we really need to be focusing on as a community, is that grassroots. And this is my final comment. I know I said that was my final comment. This is definitely my final comment on the issue. And this is the most controversial one. And I know some of these groups will find it offensive, but I think it needs to be aired, and it already has. Many of the existing groups claiming to represent the Sikh community are disconnected, disorganized, and unprofessional. They do not have the skills or communication skills to adequately represent us. Often, I must say that it isn't their fault. It's because it's not their fault. Sometimes they've been put forward. Sometimes they've put themselves forward. But, for whatever reason, this is how they are. They're not representing us in the way that I think we would like them. And in many cases, overriding and underpinning political rivalries and gripes influence and motivate their agendas. And this is the point I'm trying to make, is it's just not getting down to that grassroots kind of representation. Final point. Now, the second question I want to answer is, what is the case for establishing a central liaison mechanism which advocates for the UK Sikhs at governmental policy and consultation level? Well, I suppose the case is quite clear. And the method is, in terms of the objectives, it's to answer all of the above. But the point I want to make is that the Sikh community cannot continue on the trajectory hitherto experienced. There is a strong case for reforming or restructuring. I'm not advocating that we form a new group, but whatever has to happen, we can't continue on that. And that reforming and restructuring mechanism must include a wide range of voices, some which will conflict, affiliations, ages, professions, and it must not be guided or influenced or underpinned by political or Jathebandik factors. They've got to represent the grassroots. At its core, this group will or should comprise of a cross range of professions, a cross range of ages, a cross range of Jathebandik views. I'm not even saying that we should cut out all the Jathebandik views. That's not the point here. We have to represent the community much better than we are. That's the point, right? And once the group becomes infiltrated by one particular agenda or one particular Jathebandik view, that's when we start to self-destruct. And that's what, as Raminderji said a few moments ago, that's what we have done. We set out with good intentions, but then we go into a period of self-destruction, which ultimately results in a faction setting off and setting up yet another group.
So you mentioned about there being 240 universities across the UK.
140.
140, sorry. And there only being 20 Sikh chaplains across those. How do you foresee those chaplains working with existing, say, Gurdwara Jathebandiyan to represent the voice of young people?
Okay, well, I think the problem here is the 120 chaplains that don't exist. I'm not as worried about the 20 that are in situ, because at least they're there. It's the other 120 that we need to put into place, and that is a project that Sikhs in Academia are working on. And by this time next year, we'll have a lot of news. This is fundamental. I'll tell you why. When Sikh students have problems at universities, they are told to, they're signposted to a few places, but one of the people they can't go to is the Sikh chaplain, because there isn't one there. So they often go to the chaplain, the Anglican chaplain, or whoever they go to. They don't always come to us. This is the other thing. They don't always come to academics. It's the Natural University signposting sends them to the chaplain.
I would like to commend you for the services Sikh in Academia is doing for the community at large. My question to you would be on the second limb. It's a very impressive evidence that you have given, but my question to you would be, and what I said to Jogaji also, hypothetically, even if we assume we do not have a majority voice, Sikh in Academia, Sikh in law is there, we have Jathebandis, we have senior people. What if we start from here and we establish a liaison committee? How do you foresee a structure of that committee? As I've mentioned before, we have done policy challenges with very little input from our community leaders of the past. But what has happened has happened. So what do you foresee? What sort of structure should we do to start with to give a positive news to the government so that we can liaise in a better way?
Okay.
Thank you.
So the first thing that you are already doing, which hasn't really happened before, is that you're consulting. Whether people choose to engage with that or not is their problem, not yours. You have opened it up, and anyone can contribute, and that's the first step in any kind of initiative like this. Is you've got to give people the chance to speak and to express their voice, and that's what you have done. And you've got evidence bundles, and I'm sure you'll go through them and you'll gather all that opinion. I like the idea of job descriptions, but I'm not so keen on the regional representation. I'll tell you why. Because it's job descriptions you want to fill. You've got roles that need to be filled, and you want the best people to fill those roles, regardless of what their specific political affiliation is, what their caste is, what samparda they're from, whether they are actually Amritari or Sejtari. I think that, to me, doesn't matter. You want the best people to fill those roles, because that is what will give the confidence to that next generation, especially. That's the generation that I'm talking about, all those Sikh students who are not going to the Gurdwara, and they're not going to go to the Gurdwara, they're not going to enter the committees, but they want to see a professional body like this set up and get the confidence that we're doing things right. So I like that idea. Put the best people in that job. Have an interview process, have assessment centres, assessment days, whatever it takes to get the best talent in the UK at that table that you're trying to set up.
Just a lot of the engagement with the Sikh community, and the policymakers are only engaging with Londoners, for example.
So what I would suggest is, and I know politically it's not correct, but positive discrimination in the following sense. So we have a vacancy for a student rep on our committee now. And we are actively looking to recruit a student rep from London, because they're not very well represented there. So we know in the talent pool that exists in London, there will be someone that can fill that position. So now we'll have a representative there. We've got a representative in the north, and the Midlands is well covered. So you're trying to do two things. You are trying to get that geographical spread, but you're also trying to get the best people. And ideally, you want to tick both boxes. And when you're finding that all the applications are coming from London, then you might want to drive it up north and try to get more interest from over there before you start shortlisting. And
Sikhs in law have done an amazing, amazing output in such a short period. And your review of what you did with the Bloom report, I think, is building confidence that professionals can make a significant contribution to Panthic issues. And I think we've just suffered from that in the past. We've had this suspicion around professionals, purely because professional networks in the past have not worked to the community's benefit. And we see that with OBs and MBEs and all these things being awarded very early on in people's careers. When you think OBs and MBEs are deserved by people who have done something in their lives over the last decades or whatever, and we're seeing people in their 20s being given OBs and MBEs, and then we see those OBs and MBEs being used by those individuals being used for government liaison and as government reps. Now, my submission was around, again, the COVID task force issue, and I think Dr. Gurnam Singh's spoken about it, and many have spoken about that, because I think that is a very good example, it's a very strong example of how badly the government has engaged with the Sikh community. I think the second example is the Bloom Review and how the Bloom Review has come out. Now, in my view, they've been two of the worst. I don't think it's as doom and gloom as some of the discussion here is, and maybe I'm clouded. This is all to do with the imposition of an individual. I don't care. It wasn't so much about the individual who he was non-Amritari or whether he was gay or sexual orientation, whatever it was. I don't believe that was the major issue. Yes, there was a bias and there were concerns around that. But I think the main issue was you had someone who was imposed upon you from the government as being your representative. This is on par with the Archbishop of Canterbury, the chief rabbi, and you've got an individual that's been brought here and being imposed upon the Sikh community. And I think that was our biggest concern at that point in time. Regardless of, he may have been the right person for the job. I'd argue he wasn't representative of Gurdwaras. I don't think he was involved in Gurdwaras, but the way that was managed and the way that was done is an example of the problems we have engaging with government. Now, I'm that London person, as Sukhinder Singh will say, that often gets thrown into the meetings with government because of the location that I'm at. So often I've sat in those meetings with, if we're lucky to get a meeting with a minister, great. But often, it's with civil servants, or it might be with shadow cabinet or whatnot. But I've been in those meetings, and there is a glass ceiling that we have, and I think we have to be aware of that. So as much as we internalize our problems and understand our internal issues, we have a glass ceiling that is only so far our conversations go. Maybe it's because we're a micro community. That's part of it as well. We're not seen as our voice doesn't have as much value, or it's not seen as having so much value. And we've got foreign policy working against us. Now, we do have interference by the Indian government. Bloom's review was a prime example, I think a very blatant and overt example of influence by the Indian government, creating the Khalistan issue as bigger than what it is, and the invention of words as PKE, which is an abbreviation for pro-Khalistan extremism, which we're seeing now as a mantra. We're seeing that more and more coming out, not just from the Indian media, but ministers also using that kind of language. So you can have the greatest, with all due respect, you can have the person with the best skill set, you can create the best Jathebandi out there, with the right mix of people, but you will hit a point where there's only so far you can take that discussion forward, because I think there is that glass ceiling that you got. And I'm sure colonialism and racism and the remnants of that still form that sort of that glass ceiling that exists out there. We have a structure. I have had a love-hate relationship with the Sikh Council. I've been on the Sikh Council. I'm no longer on the Sikh Council, but I still believe that is a good structure. And when I was on that Sikh Council back in 2012, 2016, what I noticed is no matter what dialogue was taking place, no matter, even if it wasn't an agreement, there was an opportunity for Gurmat consensus on that table. On that table, you would see a representative of the Ramgarh community, of the Patra community, of the pro-Khalistan community, of the, non-general sort of non-Khalistani, whatever, I can't think of the right word, but you had a mix. And that was the first place I actually saw that. I said, okay, love it or hate it, this is where it's going to happen. This is where these discussions happen. And good output came out. There was guidance given around mixed marriages. That may have not been implemented. And like I think someone mentioned, things get lost in implementation, but there was good guidance given out. There was good guidance given out about same-sex marriages as well, and what we do in the event of how Gurdwaras can protect themselves against same-sex marriage without being discriminatory. So, there was output that used to come out, and, where it got lost, it got lost in, some of the dynamics, there was polarization, a bit of that. It is legacy. It has been going on for 30, maybe 30, 40 years, probably stemming back to the 80s. But there is a bit of polarization. But I've seen that polarization also come together, and I've seen it overcome when issues come. Pajoga Singh's probably the right person to explain how we all do come together. If anyone's seen unity, I think Pajoga Singh's probably seen unity the most. When the issues arise, there is unity. And I think there's power behind that. So as Dr. Jasjit Singh said, we are issue-driven. It may be reactionary, but sometimes that's when you see the unity. That's when you see people work together. And that's when you see the good dynamics. Maybe we can capitalize on it at that point in time.
But isn't that something like the Bloom Report? Do you think we've capitalised on that?
I'm very proud of the work that you've done. I always said to Blue, I said to Blue that you were a knight in shining armour, because when it came out, I said we need a legal challenge to this.
And a number of Jathebandis, as you probably heard me say, came together and submitted their report.
Yeah, we all submitted individually, but
But
in
for
all the
this
same way.
piece of work, do you think there's an element of them feeling a threat in terms of their ability to represent the community?
No, I don't think that much more. I think it's more of suspicion than threat. What's this person's game? I don't think the threat thing is that big a deal as much as, what's his game? What's he really up to? And it's that. And that takes time. That takes time to break down those barriers. But we have a community that's gone through a lot in the last 40 years. We've got every right to be suspicious and see ulterior motives and agendas, because they have been taking place and driven. There's people in this room that can, explain and tell us that's how things have worked. So sometimes I think we've got to cut the slack. Give people some slack and say there is that as well. What you're proposing is long. It's going to take a long time. I don't think you're going to find a fix in this. I mean, you can put the stakeholder mapping exercises together. You can do all of that. It's been done before. It was done when Sikh Council was formed. It was probably done even before that in different incarnations of whatever we had set up then. So you've had this done many times. So there is an element of reinvention of the wheel as well. If you go through all of that again, I think what you have to look at is look at the current structures and how can you better utilize them? How can you strengthen them?
What's your views of fixing the Sikh Council and other organisations?
I think it needs to be fixed.
Can it be fixed?
Well, I think there's opportunity for unity. I think there's opportunity if the right questions are asked and the right people. Look, I'm a Jathebandi jumper, right? I've never been associated with one Jathebandi because I will go with the people who I find work and do the best thing. So people look at me and think, oh, he's at the Federation Convention, then he's sitting here or he's sitting there. I'll go where the work's being done.
Can I ask you, because where you based?
Yeah.
And also your reference to international relations and the work of the Foreign Office, and the fact that it could very well be that Indian government is wrongly being briefed by whoever from the establishment here. Do you think there is a merit in politics apart? We're not interfering with political activists and organizations' politics. The point is, do you think there is a merit in engaging with the government of India to make sure they understand the wider view of 750,000 Sikhs in this country?
That is a killer question. I think that's a difficult one to answer. And I think where we are currently with what's happening in Canada, that's really going to be a difficult discussion. I think it's a non-discussion at this point in time, because I think we've reached a...
Do you think you will tackle it at all, or leave it aside as a different question?
Yeah, I think leave it aside. I don't think we can have that discussion. I think you will find that the Jathebandis who are very vocal will want to have that. It's also understanding and managing the personalities out there. We are a personality. There is personalities, that drive some of this, and you do have to understand how to manage that. Skill sets are great, and skill sets are important for work streams and project work and delivering. But ultimately, as well, there is this layer of you can call it personalities, you can call it charisma, you can whatever you want to call it.
Sure.
They're the people that actually have the most influence, and they're the movers and the shakers. And sometimes you have to bear them in mind as well.
But in terms of active Sikh representation, whilst of course Jathebandis, organizations, political activists may have their big ambitions, but nevertheless, people out there, 99% of people have day-to-day pragmatic issues to be dealt with. So should they be just left aside?
No. I mean, those ambitions that you talk about, those people who we might brand them or label them as having politicized agendas, whatever, they believe that what they're doing is the right for the community. There's no bad person in this. There's no bad actors. Everyone's really a good actor. It's just a misinterpretation or it's just the way it's being delivered. But they believe they've got the community's interests at heart. If you go and talk to them, what they believe they're doing is the right thing. Yes, they've got blind spots. They're not seeing things like mental health issues, like Dr. Jinder Singh's mentioned. They're not seeing, the day-to-day issues, and that is a risk. Yeah, and we have got blind spots there, and that needs to be worked on. But this is where you have areas of expertise. There are grassroots organisations that are doing the right things. If they come together on the platform of the Sikh Council, then everything gets represented. Then mental health will get represented. Then NHS issues and issues of bullying, education, etc. They'll all be represented. At this point in time, we just don't have that one platform. This is where we have to move away from the Gurdwara model. I think we've over-invested in that idea that everything's going to come out of the Gurdwaras. These youngsters, many of these youngsters here that are coming to Sikhi have not coming to Sikhi because of the Gurdwaras. There have been camps, there's been social media, it's been prachar, education groups like Basis of Sikhi, Devanhar, Sikh to Inspire. They are the ones who are bringing this next generation forward. So the Gurdwara is just, it's there for birth, deaths and marriages now. It's a venue centre, whatever you call it, it's commercialised. I think to a certain extent, we've got to accept that that's what it is. Yes, Kuldeep Singh, you're right, they are the treasury. And the biggest problem is we're not able to access that treasury, hence we're in this situation. But also we've got an over expectation in where the Gurdwara is at this point. We need that reset is a massive reset of changing the attitude of the Gurdwara, that they're not just about weddings.
They show that point's taken, because earlier on, one point was made that in actual fact, in this session, we may have over-demonized Gurdwaras.
Yeah, I feel so.
But I think we make it very clear that Gurdwara is a huge resource of our community, and Sikh community's birth, death, weddings, birthdays, everything revolves around, our life revolves around Gurdwaras, and they of course collect assets through those ceremonies. And the question is, how can we tap into those assets to ensure the community, in fact, capitalize for their future purposes? That's the point, isn't it?
I just want to pick up on the point you made about moving away from the Gurdwara model, and you gave examples of like Basics of Sikhi camps that are done external to Gurdwara that work effectively to re-engage young people and those who are coming into Sikhi. If you could tease out what are the characteristics of those models that make them work, what would they be?
I think it's
in your view?
Well, it's peer on peer work, isn't it? These are young people talking to young people. That makes a big difference. Generation gap is a huge issue. It always has been an issue as well. I mean, I was a youngster in a Gurdwara community, so I got to see this generation gap. And bridging it is very difficult because there are cultural differences of someone being brought up in Britain and someone from Punjab and stuff. So those issues that exist. But I also think they've emphasised, they understand the gaps. And Prabandhas often don't. When you end up in a Gurdwara community, often you're just like being nuts and bolts. You have all this vision that I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that, we're going to do this in the Gurdwara. In the end, it is also a building. There's drains get blocked, things happen, and you get tied down with all of that. So you can't always blame the Gurdwaras for not understanding or being aware of what's happening out on the street, because they are also maintaining a building. I think the biggest mistake we've got, I'm sorry to go on, but if we wanted to restructure the namings of our Gurdwara and having the word president, Pradhan, I think these aren't the right names. They don't represent what the Gurdwara is. It's a caretaker. We should see strength in that. We just need a Pradhan, we need a caretaker, and we need a treasurer in a Gurdwara, and someone who can manage a diary and a langari. Honestly, that's what I'm saying. That's all you need in the Gurdwara. You don't need 21 people to run that. I think Gurdwaras will run very efficiently if that was done that way. And then you have your other arms. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, we've got education, all these other things. But having a president and names like that, we almost think we've got little parish councils everywhere. And the reality of it is it's a place of worship. It's a venue for births, deaths and marriages and other things as well. So it's not empowered enough to be representative of the Sikh issues. That's how I feel the model is.
I'll just take from where the chair left, and I'm grateful you've given a very clear evidence. Now, if I give you an example, I'm advising a group of council, some other country, and they're bringing a claim against human rights breaches in their own country. Now, what I've seen there, they have got a network of little council, small council, and they've got a network of about 70 MPs who are helping. They're raising voices in Parliament, and they're trying to do what they can do. On the basis of that example, we being such a big community in the UK, and do you think if we are able to establish a liaison committee, and what I asked the other, like Joga Singh ji, Professor Gurnam ji, a liaison mechanism, and taking into account we won't have a majority view, and we also take the view of chair. Of course, we agree Gurdwara Sahib is a neutral place. Whoever can come with us, they're welcome. But even if we take into account what Sikh in law and Sikh in academia are doing, we heard from the president of Sikh in academia, they're doing wonderful work. And we establish a liaison committee. And we then, because ultimately if you have to negotiate on policy, whether it's NHS policy, education policy, legal, it has to be a negotiation. You have to liaise with the government. Do you think it's a good starting point for us from here in terms of establishing a liaising committee so that we can jointly have working groups on different areas, and we can then start at least whatever resources we have, whatever jathebandis can come to us, start negotiating and engaging with the government on policy level?
Yeah. Oh, it's a very good model. I think that's the kind of model we need to be moving to, work streams-based working group models. I think we've tried it in the Sikh Council. We came up with that concept, but it was just difficult to, again, it was the pool of people that we had. We probably didn't have a pool of people to be able to deliver that. But I think that is something that would work well, and I think that's what's required, because the expertise is out there in the community, with 700,000 spread out across the UK, highly educated, whatever. We've got the expertise. It's recognizing the talent, it's retaining the talent, and then it's just basically utilizing the talent. And unfortunately, we haven't been great at that. I mean, the Muslim community, ironically, when we meet them, and they look up to us, they think we're united, they think we lobby well with government, and they've got a very different view of us. And I think we beat ourselves a lot looking at externally. But when external communities look at us, they often think that we are the ones who are more organized. We understand our issues, and we go out there and lobby Parliament. They may have seen a micro element of that, but it's left a perception in the head that we're punching above our weight, basically.
Michael Singh, just slightly off topic, but I think it's important given your significant contribution to the Bloom report we did. One of the issues that we had to deal with was this infighting. How do you see us overcoming that issue?
It's there. Again, there's no overnight solution.
A dispute resolution sort of mechanism.
No, I mean, look, these ideas about having a Sikh court and all these this ambition that we have, I think it's important, and I think it's a move towards self-determination and self-governance. Because the reality of it is, if you're not going to have self-determination in that, in Punjab or wherever, then how do you create self-governance and self-determination? It's through creating these kind of models in the diaspora. So a Sikh law of court for arbitration, to manage these kind of disputes and issues is important. It's required. I've been in the midst of these disputes. I've seen money go down the pan basically in legal fees when these things arise. We shouldn't be going down that route. We do need some kind of form of arbitration. And if there's any power that the Sikhs in law would have in that, would be creating and setting something along those lines where we have that platform. I think there's space for it. Personally, I think if a neutral body did come together and try and bring those three, and I include three, that's the Sikh Assembly as well. Yeah. And I say if you bring the Sikh Assembly, the Supreme Sikh Council, and the Sikh Council in a meeting together and basically from the Sangat we do a benti to say, look, reform and form as one, even rebrand or whatever, but form as one and bring those gurdwaras together. And the one that, not Gurdwara, which was the other one that was mentioned today, which I'd never heard of.
The Gurdwara.
Which one was
the
it?
The Gurdwara Council.
Yeah, that Gurdwara with 179 Gurdwaras. Well, if that exists, then fair enough. 178. So even bring that. But the problem is we have got a lot of paper organisations out there as well, and that's such a big risk for us. They're not real grassroots. They're not in touch with the Gurdwara. They're not disseminating down. They're just on paper. They're a letterhead. And
so we don't need another one.
We don't need the letterhead.
Yeah,
well, we can't, but we've got to bring it all together. But also getting rid of those letterhead organisations is so important because they've been a big problem for us as
Do you
well.
think
Okay,
it's relevant
fine.
to the selection process, the job description, even with reforming all of these organisations? Does that form part of it?
Yeah, no, I mean, by all means, we need that. Yeah, I mean, bring that in, bring structure in, bring, I mean, one of the things that this is going to be a criticism of the Sikh Council anyway. I think it was, when it was formed, I think there was a big civil service, local government lens that was seen through it. And I think that was a level of over bureaucracy. And I think that might be an inhibitor. I think we've got to take some of the layers of bureaucracy off. You need bureaucracy, it's important, but I also feel that not to have too many layers of bureaucracy. I mean, we are a government-centred consensus, so but Khalsa, I'm sure the layers of bureaucracy weren't so rigid when those sort of Khalsa meetings took place back in the
Okay,
17th
thank you.
century.
Dr. Lali's, your is very focused practitioner contribution, so we're grateful for that one, Council.
Thank you.
And thanks again for coming from London all
No,
the
no
way.
problem.
It's good, thank you.
Can I begin by acknowledging the collective trauma and pain our community carries? And given all the discussions and information we've received, and heard today, I think it's really important to acknowledge that. And it's specifically linked to the partition in 1947 and the impact of colonialism and the continued genocide of Sikhs from Guru Sahib's time, and it continues. We need to remember where we've come from to have a clear path for where we are heading. That my kind of contribution in person today will be very much focused on governance and risk and accountability. So linking back to my point about the collective trauma that we carry, I think it's very important to acknowledge that those of us leading any seva roles must acknowledge this trauma that sometimes manifests as ego that we have been referring to today. Also emotional barriers, why organizations start to go down that rabbit hole, or that ability to actually agree to disagree on certain issues. We must acknowledge that. Why it's important to acknowledge it? Because as Sikhs, as a community, we face the barriers and blockages that we face. Despite having, as everyone before me has also alluded to, and we know this, that we have extensive knowledge, intelligence, best intentions at heart. Everyone's here with best intentions. We're giving our time and commitments. We make progress, but then we inadvertently start to go down that rabbit hole. This is why we need to acknowledge the trauma that manifests in different ways when we are trying to achieve greater good for our community. So we must work towards developing emotional resilience as individuals, as families, as community, and as Panth. Given that sort of context, I won't comment specifically on all the 4 questions that were invited for evidence, but I will ask questions on the back of that and leave that for reflection with the panel and members in attendance. So are current organizations aware of and contributing to the current consultations preceding the bills in the Parliament? There are quite a few high-profile bills currently going through the Parliament, which will have an impact on all of us, not just as Sikhs, but as British citizens of this country. Are we as a community aware of those? Are the organizations that have been in operation actually responding to the consultations that are published preceding the bill's discussions in the House of Commons or House of Lords? I will leave that as a question for reflection, and I think that holds the answer in itself.
That's a very important point, because this is the whole purpose of this exercise.
Absolutely.
That we want to be proactive, not reactive all the time. We pick up what's in the legislation out there coming our way rather than afterwards.
So I have a very keen interest in sort of, longevity, also Doordrashti jino se kehte hain, that we've lost sight of because we have become reactive. So just to name a few, which I will leave with the audience today to go away and research the impact of these potentially. British Bill of Rights and withdrawal from European Convention on Human Rights Bill, Data Protection and Digital Information Bill, and Clean Air Bill, just to name a few. But there's quite a few going through the Parliament at the moment. And if you develop that helicopter view and look at all of these collectively, we can see the impact of these in years to come, which are not far from now. So I will leave that for reflection. As a community, we have no clear position or policy on safeguarding. It was good to hear Dr. Gurnaam Singh mention safeguarding and Safer 6 initiative, which I was actually part of as well. And there have been a range of issues in our Gurdwara in relation to granthis or other individuals. And because we have had we have been reflecting on the Gurdwara committees and structures in place, I will mention this. We are experts in passing the buck. When a Gurdwara issue happens, as long as we have expelled the granthi or the said individual, our responsibility is done. There is no single register for granthis in the UK, which Safer 6 was trying to work on at the time, where actually people who have been found guilty of safeguarding or any other sort of, conduct issues
and there's
should
a
be
related
registered
question
on.
that how far Gurdwara is involved in checking.
I was going to come on to
Okay,
DBS.
I'll leave it to you.
So we did start that process at the time where we were starting to explore the process of DBS for grantees or other individuals coming on Seva visas from India or anywhere else. But the issue here was because they could have committed a crime, say in Punjab, we would not be aware of that. And ਇੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ request ਕਰਦੇ ਆਂ DBS, this is the advice we had received at the time, they would not be able to confirm whether there was a past history. But again, it's about governance. Yeah. So how do we become risk averse and actually proactively think about who are we inviting into our institutions and public places? So what's the role here for Gurdwara in regards to safeguarding? What's the role here for the next liaison body to actually have that lens on safeguarding? What's the role of the body then to create that policy or whatever it might be, a procedure on safeguarding that also then feeds into the policy development at national level or international level? Right? There's food for thought there. We currently also lack engagement with devolved nations or devolved authorities. For example, West Midlands Combined Authority. There are a number of these in operation across the country. So there was a reference to policy and lawmaking in London and difficulty to engage at different regional levels. But actually we do have some authorities operating at regional level. So again, this is a question for those currently involved in some of those organizations. I don't know if they are engaging or not. So I don't know. It's a question back to individuals involved. So it's open, honest question. Are we engaging with authorities? Are we not? If we are, how are we providing that feedback back to the Sangat? So if something is happening at West Midlands regional level with the combined authority, have we ever met the mayor? I don't know. What's the opportunity there? To liaise with government representatives in these authorities that have been developed.
Would you have a view on how, for example, these things are progressing or not progressing in Scotland, in home nations, basically?
I don't know,
okay.
Is the honest answer. But again, the reason I made the reference to devolved nations was because we do have Scottish Sikh community,
Yeah.
So I don't know if the Sikh Council or any of the other organizations mentioned do have representatives from Scotland. I don't know. Right, okay. So again, so as UK body or liaison body, if that's the intention, or it may be just England representative. How do we engage with the devolved communities in other nations as well in the UK? And again, just linking that point back to Gurdwara before I move on to what the liaison body could look like.
Sure.
So Gurdwaras have been our anchor organisation. That this is a new terminology floating around, especially in the NHS at the moment, and again in governmental sort of policies as well. If you search up anchor organisations, you'll find a lot of information, and academics are probably kind of aware of that terminology. So Gurdwara have been our anchor organisations. How do they become fit for purpose again? I'm not suggesting Gurdwara Sudhar Lehar here or Committee Sudhar Lehar, but there is that kind of work we need to do to look at how do we make them safe again for the generations to come to start engaging again. I would like to move on to my thoughts on the liaison body going forward. So it should have a clear governance structure, which could have national body and then regional and local sort of representatives. They could be thematic work streams that were mentioned. It should have a clear purpose. It should have clear terms of reference. It should have code of conduct for the membership. So this is all coming from sort of my day job, but equally I see this gap in our community in how we function and operate. We all have these governance structures that we abide by in our respective day jobs, but when we are in any seva roles, we fail to bring that professionalism sometimes, and ego comes in the way, as we've acknowledged. So keeping that aside, so code of conduct, terms of reference, mandatory training. So we may be selecting individuals or appointing individuals, regardless of what that process might be. There should be mandatory training as a minimum for all those in that representation. Yes? Sure. So we have SMEs, subject matter experts in our community. Again, colleagues have mentioned that before. Why are we not using that, utilizing that intelligence? Working with people who have that knowledge to actually collectively bring together this change and collectively become that voice that can represent the community. Age-appropriate consultation with cross-sections of Sikh community. If you are engaging with children, for example, or teenagers, or disabled, population in the community, is that relevant? Is that appropriate for them? So tools of communication must be relevant and appropriate. Audits of Gurdwara and Gurdwara committees. I think this has been failing and lacking. And so a couple of individuals did mention this and reference to this before. Parameters could be agreed through maybe the council of the committees that were mentioned before, earlier in the day. Maybe they could agree the parameters, but where is that accountability? Where is that responsibility tied back to? If the committee knows I'm not accountable to anyone, I might be informed of very serious sort of issue in our local sangat. Am I gonna govern that and not share that with my committee because no one's gonna find out? Where is that accountability sitting? If the Council of Sikh Gurdwara Committees, whatever it's called, is actually there to bring them all together, has it developed a structure to actually hold them to account? Or is it sort of that tick box that we meet once a year? I don't know. I don't know enough to comment on that part. We have lots of committees in our organizations, but how about task and finish groups with a clear focus, clear timeline? Committees can meet 2 vari saal, 4 vari, whatever, right? No one's challenging them. No one's asking them for updates because we are still discussing it. Task and finish groups can have a clear timeline that you are working on. Maybe all the thematic groups that sit within this body, whatever it might look like, actually have quarterly plans. You would have an annual plan, action plan, and then you could have your quarterly plan. So if I'm leading a program at work, I have task and finish groups. So I have a clear focus on what's the timeline to deliver this work stream? What's the timeline to deliver this action? It's not an ongoing issue for discussion in 5 years. Right? Where's the audit for that? Task and finish groups. Have a clear comms plan. How is that body going to communicate with the Sangat, with the policymakers, with the devolved nations? Your communication and engagement plan should be very clear and strategically lay out what are your channels of communication and marketing if necessary, but communication and engagement definitely. Are your stakeholders aware of the key ambitions or priorities for the next financial year? Are we aware of the government policy priorities for the next 5 years? As a commissioner, we used to foresee what's coming through policy, and then we would make our plans in advance for the next 5 years or next 2 years. Linking back to the sort of conduct of the committee and representatives, professional development, how about reverse mentoring and coaching? I'm a coach, but I'm not here to plug that, but reverse mentoring is very important. We have individuals in our community who have delivered and done a lot of seva. The next youth or maybe the liaison committee members could be paired up for reverse mentoring and that professional development. Annual review and appraisals. Who's going to monitor what they're delivering? Where's the performance review? Let's, like somebody else mentioned before me, let's conduct ourselves as a business. Let's get serious about it. If we're going to invest this much time and effort into creating something to make sure we are actually effectively engaging with policymakers, are we acting as professionals as a minimum? And that includes that accountability. And yes, I'm open to being appraised. If I'm doing something, if you're doing something, you should expect that. So if the Gurdwara are failing, some of them might be doing excellent seva, not saying they're all failing. Maharaj ne sanu ghar ghar andar dharamsal da model dasya siga, hai na? So are we holding spaces in our families, in our dinner tables, on our dinner tables, with our next generation, with our elders, to engage in open dialogue, constructive, open, debating conversations? Or are we teaching them how to say hanji? Because that's good practice, isn't it? So very much start from the core of the family, but equally we should be able to take that model then at the national level.
Background ideas, and not just in terms of giving some context to what I'm going to say, so I think it's important from that perspective. So I've been on the other side where I've actually worked in the civil service as a civil servant for a number of years. So I worked for DWP, Commission for Racial Equality. I worked for the Equality and Human Rights Commission. So I've been on that side of the table. And as Dr. Sangha said, for the last 10 years, I've been working in higher education. So I'm the Associate Director for Equality and Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Wolverhampton. And purely to give some context in terms of what I'm going to say. Voluntary basis, I've worked with a number of organisations. Obviously, before the Sikh Council was set up, there was an organisation called the British Sikh Consultative Forum. And again, that was a similar exercise to what we're trying to do here. Again, there's pitfalls there. We then set up the Sikh Council UK. And again, similar exercise to what we're doing here. But I think it's important that we learn lessons from those, and I'll touch on that later. Currently, I think it's important, I stress this point, I'm an advisor to the Sikh Federation UK. And I work very closely with them. And I just want to say a bit about the Sikh Federation, because obviously it's been mentioned quite a lot here in terms of just clarity of what we are. Now, Sikh Federation is quite clear in terms of what their work is. The predecessor to the Sikh Federation was the International Sikh Federation. That was set up after 1984. And its core principle was about Sikhs in Punjab, self-governance, self-determination, raising the human rights issues that are happening in India. Likewise, what we're concerned about is that we're not just fighting for the self-identity in Punjab. Actually, there's a self-identity crisis in England as well, where we're living. So a lot of our work is very much around identity issues around the UK. The International Sikh Federation, along with Babbar Khalsa, got banned in this country. And as a result, the ISY formed the Sikh Federation UK. And that's where we changed our stance completely. And we became focused around lobbying. Our main focus was on lobbying, to actually get involved in the institutions of where we're living to highlight the issues of what's happening to the Sikhs. So that was our core principle, and we will never compromise on that principle. Wherever organisation is set up, whatever structure is set up, we'll be part of it, but we will never ever compromise on our core principles. I think it's quite clear we stress that out. That's our core principles. And the reason we worked on political lobbying is that when somebody tries to hide your voice within the existing structures, you use the political structure of contacting your MPs to then ask the government on your behalf. If the government is not talking to you because of external pressures, then use that structure. And that's been the focus of the work we do. So I wanted to stress that. As far as this setup, Sikh Federation is quite clear. We will observe, we will listen, we will get engaged, but we will never ever compromise on our core principles. If we see anybody compromising on those core principles, then we will get out of that structure and let that structure carry on. So one of our main reasons of any structure, any liaisons, anything that's set up, we will engage. Because the Sikh Federation is quite clear, we are part of the GOM. No organisation can represent the GOM. Yeah, the GOM is the collective of everybody, and that's our clarity as well. So just putting that into context, I think my observations, and I'll come on to one of these, I think the first thing we need to look at is what was said earlier, is that we have to be grounded on Gurmat principles. We might not all follow those principles, but we all follow Sikhi. Some follow it more, some don't follow it that much, but we're all grounded by our belief in those Gurmat principles. And I think any work we do needs to be based around those principles. One of the things, as a federation or anybody else, we will not compromise on Gurmat principles. Throughout time, in terms of policy work, legislation of the government, we've had to challenge the legal framework in this country because it went against Gurmat principles. And with Guru's Kirpa, we actually all won those issues. And we've got the right for the Qurban, right for the Siddhi, right for the Star, right for Qara. All these were lobbied for, sometimes case law, but we've got those rights in this country. Thirdly, I think somebody talked about unity. Actually, Sikhs have got unity. It's issue-based unity. Let's be quite clear in terms of when we're talking about unity, what are we talking about? A lot of our understanding is unity is about dissolving everything and making one structure that can be compromised. It doesn't work. From the Sangharsh since '84, if we look at structures, we had structures like a Pantha committee, which was a collective, making collective decisions on a collective basis. So I think just that's some background. And I think the other important point, before I just summarize in 5 minutes, is representation as a bogeyman. You know, we all talk about representation. Actually, why do we have to talk about a representation for the Sikh community? Who says you have to one? Can you tell me one community in this world who's homogeneous? There's diversity within every community. And I'll give you an example. When working with the Equality and Rights Commission, we had the Equality Act 2010. We were engaged in stakeholder events, and I was leading on religion or belief policy. So we engaged with certain religious groups to look at the impact, especially around, talk about tension between sexual orientation and religion or belief. So we had meetings with Christianity or Christian groups. There was one group. There was a group of Christian organisations, denominations. We had meetings with Muslim groups, not one representative, but a whole group. Same with the Jewish. It wasn't just the deputy board of Jews, it was a whole group. So why do we get fixated on saying we have to have one representation? Let's get away from that bogeyman. Yeah? Let's look at something different. Let's look at our history when we're developing the Constitution of the Sikh Council, but we also get some principles based around our historic aspects. Consensus-based decision making. Yeah? There's no voting system. Consensus. We can do it. The concept was to have a collective leadership. And I think one of the points I've raised is that I don't think it's worth getting separate councils or groups together. I think two things need to happen from an independent review in terms of lessons learned and good practice. Why did those councils fail? What can we learn from that? And then develop a framework to get people involved and to have that discussion. पता कि साडी अपनी पर्सनैलिटी है जे तुसीं कहता भी सारे इकट्ठे होया उन्हें कहना मैं उन्हां नहीं बहना उन्हें कहना उन्हें काम खराब कीता सीगा ਮੈਂ ਕਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਬੈਠਾ ਉਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ original ਸੀ council ਆ ਉਹ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਚਲ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ so rather than that have a framework to have that discussion yeah in terms of lawyers or legal or conflict resolution we can develop that have that framework but have lessons learned so that's one secondly
Suvinder, may I intervene and ask just for understanding and clarity? I recall very clearly 1984-85 when Sikh Federation, ISYF was established, we were part of that and all the rest. And it was a huge pool of talented, experienced, qualified, well-meaning, and committed people. Very large number. And of course, the entire Sangat was mobilized. And but over the years, we were talking about getting together people who have those qualities. Help me understand how come that over the years, rather now decades, we have lost that pool of people.
sorry
It's reduced to very few people. I'm not questioning work. You already have described that. I don't criticize that.
ਪਤਾ ਕੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਇਹ ਹੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਸੈਕਟਰੀਏਸ਼ਨ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਸਾਰਾ ਫੋਲੋ ਕਰਦੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਸੀਗੀ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਗੁਰੂ ਨਾਨਕ ਦੇਵ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਟਾਪ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਉਹਨੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਪੁੱਤਰਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੁਰਗੱਦੀ ਦਿੱਤੀ ਸੀ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਟੂ ਫੋਕਸਡ ਔਨ ਪਰਸਨੈਲਿਟੀਜ਼ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਢਾਂਚਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਦੇਖ ਲਿਆ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਵਾ ਜੇ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਗਲਤ ਵੀ ਕਰ ਦੇਵੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਸੰਤ ਦਾ ਸਟਰਕਚਰ ਛੱਡ ਦੇਣਾ ਉਹ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਮਗਰ ਚੱਲ ਜਾਣਾ that's the harsh reality so that's what I've said about organizations versus individuals and I think one of the reasons apart from ego then you have outside interference manipulation and then you have the petty politics desi politics let's not deny that and then you have that personality thing you know if I was to say hand on heart the issue with Sikh Council was a personality issue you know we looked at one individual and we think that individual can deliver everything, but we don't see other aspects. You know, Jogasan talked about capability. But what capability? We don't define that capability. ਆਪਾਂ ਕਿਹੜੀ capability define ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਉਹਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਡਿਗਰੀ ਆ ਜਿਹਦੇ ਕੋਲ ਡਿਗਰੀ ਆ ਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਉਹ ਵਕੀਲ ਆ ਨੋ ਪੰਥਾਂ ਦੇ ਲੋਏ ਸੇ ਵਾ ਉਹ ਐਕੈਡੈਮਿਕ ਆ ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਯਾਰ ਉਹ ਕੌਮ ਦਾ ਲੀਡਰ ਬਣ ਸਕਦਾ you know can a lawyer who's never been involved in social activism. I'll give my example. My daughter's an immigration lawyer. If I asked her to talk about Sikh issues, she's going to say, Daddy, I haven't got an idea. Because that's not her profession. She can bring the legal angle to it, but she can't bring the social activism to it. An academic can write a brilliant paper, but to implement the recommendations of that paper, you have to have the grassroots involvement.
Well, that's a Panthic dart, isn't it? You're
Totally.
saying
If
it's
you
a
haven't got
combination of
that,
both.
ਪਤਾ ਕੀ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਮੈਂ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ then it's very easy to compromise ਜੋ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਚੱਲਦੀ ਸੀ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਲੋਕੀ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਸੀ ਵੁਡਨ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਪਾ ਲਓ ਯਾ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਪਾ ਲਓ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਲੋਕ ਲਾ ਦਿਓ so you had a lot of issues but you have to go back to principles hard act ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋਈ ਸੀਗੀ a lot of people said ਫੇਕੀ ਹੋਇਆ ਪੱਗ ਲਾ ਕੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਟੋਪੀ ਪਾ ਲਵਾਂਗੇ but that's their individual personal viewpoint but if you put that point on the column we're compromised. So we've got to be very careful.
Sorry, I mean, everything that you said, I can totally agree with. But it's not just about, Joshua. When the Sikh Federation was made, the 5 people that were kind of picked, there were all intellectually minded people, Dr. NRI, Dr. Sadhu Singh, Dr. Barakat Singh, and there's myself, and I think the deliveries of my people in Joshua were also intellect. It seems like within Joshua has remained, maybe it's those intellects that have kind of...
It's a combination of both. ਪਤਾ ਕੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਦੂਜੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸੇ council ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ sometimes you have a concept but you have to carry people with you. ਹੁਣ ਆਪਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਗਾ ਸੋਚਦਾ ਵੀ ਆਪ ਤੇ ਪੇਪਰ ਤੇ fantastic structure. Benji talked about governance and everything. But if your people don't understand it, then they're not going to be able to fall into that. So you have to take people along. You know, we introduced the concept of consensus making, collective leadership, but the Qawm wasn't ready for that because the Qawm was used to one leader. But we weren't able to carry the Qawm with us, carry people with us to say, this is a new structure. The reason we got this structure because X, Y, and Z. जो तुसी नवे ढांचे बना लेने हैं ना वो कई बार ताइयों फेल होंदे because you haven't taken people with you. So our recommendation is, one is organisation versus individuals, and accountability. The problem you have is that if you have focus on individuals, there might be fantastic individuals with brilliant skills, but if they haven't got any accountability to anybody, then you're not going to get somewhere. Whereas organisational representatives, or Jatabandi representatives, or Gada representatives, in theory they're held to accountable to their members. So I think you've just got to be wary of that liaison there.
How would you explain the current accountability of Sikh Federation, for example?
So
Yeah.
So our accountability is quite clear. We have an annual convention and we have an annual report we give to everybody. Quite clear in terms of this is what we do. That report is there on an annual basis every year, which we publish. Yeah, to say this is what we're doing. We're accountable to our members, but we're also accountable to the family in terms of what we do. So that's us. But I think we need to delve away from that and say what is it good practice, what we can do.
So that's one very important point. I didn't raise it. I didn't mention the Sikh Federation and the issue of entries, which is what in the political language.
Sure.
Which basically means that you're trying to dominate an organisation by bringing your people in through different routes. Yeah. And certainly, I observed that what's happening in the Sikh Council. I mean, there was one election once where actually quite a lot of the executives were dominated by people who were supporters or actively were the Sikh Federation. Many of them came through like Gurdwara programs or committees, one or two other organisations that were really close people, and then the Sikh Federation actually only had 2 people in there, but technically they had half the committee.
पता कि प्रॉब्लम ये पैदी है ना मैं कह सकता मैं फेडरेशन का yeah I might be a Gurdwara committee member as well. I might be a federation supporter, but I'm a Gurdwara committee member. So ਉਹ ਮੈਂ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਬੰਦਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੇਬਲ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਲੇਬਲ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਵੀ ਬੰਦੇ ਦੀ ਕੁਆਲਿਟੀਜ਼ ਕੀ ਆ ਨਾ ਸੋ ਫੋਰਗੇਟ ਦ ਫੈਡਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਫੋਰਗੇਟ ਐਨੀਬਾਡੀ ਐਲਸ ਆਪਾਂ ਕੁਆਲਿਟੀ ਦੇਖੀਏ ਬੰਦਾ ਕੀ ਲਿਆ ਸਕਦਾ ਟੇਬਲ ਤੇ
That's the vulnerability that's what an organisation could dominate by using.
But the point is then that's our perception as well. Perception ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਕਿ perception ਹੋਇਆ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਬੰਦਾ ਜੀ ਦੇਖੋ ਸਮੈਰੀ ਗੁਰੂ ਘਰ ਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਧਾਨ ਆ but he also happens to be a follower of the federation. You know, he could have been a follower of whatever organisation, could be a member of the Labour Party. But ਆਪਾਂ ਇਹ ਦੇਖਣਾ ਬੰਦੇ ਕੋ ਟੇਬਲ ਤੇ ਕੀ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਣਾ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਉਹਦੀ ਕੁਆਲਿਟੀਜ਼ ਕੀ ਆ ਨਾ
Given that you were involved with the setup of the Sikh Council UK, etc., with the Constitution, do you think it's a salvageable organisation now?
I think what you need to do is ਜੇ ਨਾ hand on heart ਨਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ clarity ਨਾ ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ old systems which ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਚਲ ਗਏ ਨਾ revive ਕਰਨ ਤੇ ਨਾ the name's got reputation, yeah? But what is it we're failing? What's the missing gap in the government at the moment? Yeah, the missing gap is a communication between all. Sikh Council wasn't perfect. There was a network of Sikh organisations, Lord Indrajit, who stayed outside of it.
Yeah, network of one.
Yeah, well, whatever, I can't say that. But he stayed out of it. British Sikh Consultative stayed out of it. So it wasn't collective. You'll never get one collective. And I think going back to what we're saying we want to do, I think the important thing is you can call it a liaison, you can call it advisory, or you can call it a policy think tank. Yeah, that is what we were missing is, you know, when we talk about the Akal Takht, the whole setup of the Akal Takht was a base for Sikhs to get together. What we tried to do with the Sikh Council was very similar, like the Sarbat Khalsa Body. It was a base to bring everybody together and make decisions. But unfortunately, and you know, I do recommend that somebody, an academic actually, somebody does some research to say why have we failed? Well, we've been successful. What's been good and what's been bad, and where are lessons learned? I think if you are going to set something, and I'm saying from a Sikh Federation perspective, we will be sceptical. We know there's, you know, we've been black marked, equally one by the government. We've been quite clear where MPs, ministers have been not told not to speak to us. We've had a freedom of information request to get that information, right? And we're weary of outside interference to set up a structure to silence the voice of organisations like ourselves that are sticking up for rights and not compromising. This sorry, I'll quickly finish, but I think one example is really important. The government used to have Sikh roundtables. Yeah? So the government decided that the Department of Communities and Local Government and the faith division in there would act on behalf of the government to have roundtables with Sikh organisations. Yeah? So you had Sikh Council, Federation, City Sikhs, Network of Sikh organisations, British Sikh Consultative Forum, all sitting around the table.
Could I ask you that given the situation that we have currently, there may be one or two individuals in conversation with the government, but by and large, there isn't a conversation happening at the moment. Whereas there are still issues to be picked up, and there's a huge gap, especially pre, post Bloom, and where we are, in terms of developing a mechanism which can be an asset to all existing or any potential future organizations. How do you feel that process could be an advantage to existing bodies?
I'll go on to that, but I just wanted to give this one example, just to the way the government works. So they had those roundtables. Some of them were very challenging for the government. One example when that, because they were saying that that roundtable and the government for local communities will liaise on behalf of the government on Sikh issues. And it's an opportunity for Sikh issues to bring something around the table. We went into that meeting. I think there's only one or two representatives who challenged the government and civil servants to say, we've just had we've had a piece of legislation coming in, which is called the Offensive Weapons Act, which is going to ban large guns. Why didn't you tell us? You failed. You were supposed to liaison with the Sikh community to tell the Sikh issue. You failed. Now, when we challenged them, next meeting it was, oh, we don't need these roundtables anymore. We're going to bring academics on board. We're going to bring X, Y, and Z on board. We're going to change the structure. You'll always get the government, where you challenge the government, you always get throwbacks. And they will always find individuals, and I hate to say the word, who will be the yes persons. So we've got to be wary of that. But come back to your answer. But the problem up here, we haven't got the central structure, whatever you call it, which has got hired people. How can you do all this stuff on a voluntary basis? You need somebody to be monitoring consultations daily, what's coming out. Yeah? So that's why I said something like a think tank or advisory aspect or something that would not have an impact on organizations. For a federation perspective, we'd welcome something like that because we know we will carry on what we're doing. But if our expertise can be used working with others, then that's not a threat to us. That's an advantage.
So what you're saying is anything nationally in terms of consultation, liaison, and communication, which adds value to existing work, whoever is leading it, can be seen positively.
No, but ਜਦੋਂ ਕਾਉਂਸਲ ਬਣੀ ਸੀ ਨਾ ਸਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਫਾਇਦਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਫੈਡਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਜੇ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਕੁਝ ਪਤਾ ਲੱਗ ਗਿਆ ਵੀ ਕੋਈ ਸਰਕਾਰ ਕੁਝ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਕਰਨ ਲੱਗੀ ਜਾਂ ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਸ਼ਨ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਲੈ ਆਉਣਾ ਸੀਗਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕਹਿਣਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਪਰ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਉੱਥੇ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਵੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਕੱਠਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਉਹ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰੂੰਗੇ ਹਾਂ ਉੱਥੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਹੈ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਐਗਜ਼ਿਸਟਿੰਗ ਆਰਗੇਨਾਈਜੇਸ਼ਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਰੂੰਗੇ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਆ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੋਰੇ ਹੋ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਸਪੋਰਟ ਕਰੂੰਗੇ ਆਹ ਪੁਆਇੰਟਸ ਹੈਗੇ ਹੁਣ ਮੈਕੋ ਪੁਆਇੰਟ ਹੋ ਚੁੱਕਾ which person somebody else might have a better viewpoint you know but if I don't listen to that viewpoint I'm going to lose out ਤੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਮਾਈਂਡਸੈਟ ਇਦਾਂ ਦਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਵੀ ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਨੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਚੰਗੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਹਿਤੀ ਆ ਉਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਐਕਸੈਪਟ ਕਰ ਲਈਏ ਆਪਣੀ ਕਈ ਵਾਰੀ ਮਾਈਂਡਸੈਟ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ ਆਪਾਂ ਦੇਖ ਲੈਣੇ ਵੀ ਉਹ ਬੰਦੇ ਨੇ ਯਾਰ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਕੀਤਾ ਉਹਦੀ ਮੈਂ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਮੰਨੀ ਪਰ ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਮੈਂ ਗੁਰਮਤ ਪ੍ਰਿੰਸੀਪਲਸ ਤੇ ਆ ਗਿਆ ਹਨਾ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਕੋਈ ਚੰਗੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ ਉਹ ਆਪਾਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਜਾਈਏ ਉਹ ਸਿੱਖੀਏ ਨਾ ਸੋ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ you have to be very clever, quite clear in terms of what you're to do. Now, I could challenge and say, who gave the mandate to Sikhs in law to talk about this issue? Who gave the mandate to Sikhs in the academia to do this? You haven't got no mandate. But what you're saying is we're providing a framework. We're not saying we're going to do this. We're developing a framework which can be beneficial to the party. And that's your approach. ਜੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਉੱਦਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਵੀ ਆਪਾਂ ਆਹ ਬਣਾ ਦੇਣ ਲੱਗੇ ਐਂਡ ਪਤਾ ਕੀ ਵਰਡਸ ਕਾਊਂਟ ਜੋ ਆਪਾਂ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਬੋਡੀ ਉਹ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ ਵੀ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਰੈਪਰੈਜ਼ੈਂਟੇਟਿਵ ਹੋ ਗਈ ਲੈਟਸ ਗੈਟ ਅਵੇ ਸਿੱਖ ਕਾਉਂਸਲ ਦੀ ਸਾਡੀ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਬਲਮ ਸੀਗੀ ਲੋਕੀ ਕਹਿੰਦੇ ਪਏ ਜਥੇਬੰਦੀ ਆ ਇਟ ਵਾਸਨਟ ਇਟ ਵਾਸ an institutional framework.
Can I come on to that because I think that therein lies one of the tensions. Because in a sense, Sikh Federation UK implies a conglomeration of organisations. It's a federation, and therefore, and then we have the Sikh Council UK, and you know, I'm saying this partly because we want to use today's session to get everything out in the public. Yeah, you know, one allegation was that actually the Sikh Council UK was just a proxy for the Sikh Federation UK. In the sense that the federation saw itself as an umbrella organisation. How do we get rid of
ਪਤਾ
that?
ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਪਰਸੈਪਸ਼ਨਸ ਆ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਮਨ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਹਿਮ ਆ ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਇਹ ਕਹਿ ਸਕਦੇ ਵੀ ਸਾਡਾ ਆਹ ਕੰਮ ਆ ਸਾਡਾ ਕੁਆਇਟ ਕਲੀਅਰ ਕੰਮ ਆ when you talk about NHS issues and other issues, social issues, women's issues, youth issues, we're not doing those because we're specialised in one thing. But the concept of the council was to bring all those issues on board. The last thing I want to say is we've got so much diversity in skills. You need somebody to bring that together, and the only way to get away from Jathabandis competing things, it's a framework. We've all seen our professional lives when you develop frameworks, you get that buy-in. But when you start using the words national body, national thing, then it's about dissolving everything and form one. You can't do that. We're not a homogeneous community.
Okay, if for example, you think an issue is being spearheaded by people, framework, central liaison, call it what you like, and it may have a mix of professionals whose politics may not necessarily be one-sided, but it's a combination of politics because let's be honest and clear, we have within Sikh community Sikh nationalist politics, we have unionist politics, and we have assimilist politics as well, as we know. Would that be a problem?
No, not at all. But Harek Insan's got different viewpoints and opinions. Yeah, we have to accept that, right? But if you say that collective then speaks against what you're standing for, then we'd have to stand up against that and say that's not the collective voice of Sikhs. So that's why we've got to be quite clear in terms of what is the remit of whatever we want to set up now. To me, a think tank's probably ideal, but whatever we set up, we need to be quite clear what's our remit.
Okay.
And we don't undermine existing organisations or not organisations, viewpoints. Yeah.
So for the benefit of those who are witnesses in the audience, I just wanted to clarify one thing, which is, and some of you may want to contribute to this, is do we have a figure or an approximate number of how many women or those under 40 are represented in Sikh Federation, Sikh Council, in any of those bodies? Do we have some kind of number of how well that's represented?
If I was to tell you hand on heart, I'd say it's totally underrepresented.
So there's none?
No, there is.
Okay.
But it's totally underrepresented. And I think the challenge we have, and I think that's what I was trying to come up to, is one of the models we try to create is that I can speak to a government or a minister, not an issue. But if there's an issue talking about women's issues, we should be strong enough to say, I can't sit on that table and represent their views because I haven't got the lived experience. We should have a female representative sitting there. The challenge we had with, sorry, I'm going to say that the other challenge we had with the round table with the government, we said, if you're going to talk about a religious issue, then you have to have a Nambartari who's got the lived experience of that religion. If it's a specific religious issue, social issues like women's issues, youth issues, somebody's talking about any type of disease, COVID as an example, the best people to represent you around the COVID perspective is one, in terms of people who engage with the community. Secondly, medical experts. But we didn't think about that. It was we didn't think that actually a medical person would be ideal for us, especially a medical person who might be Amritari from a Sikhi perspective and a Godara perspective, who could give that feedback there. But nobody else. But I think somebody earlier talked about stakeholder mapping. It might be good. It's like Godwaras, how many women are represented in Godwaras? How many under 20s or under 30s are represented?
Hence my question.
How many people with disability? That's even a bigger question.
So how well is diversity represented
Exactly.
in those groups?
It's not.
that we're
And if
talking
it's
about?
not, then you haven't got that collective voice.
I would like to firstly thank Sikhs in academia and Sikhs in law in particular for taking this initiative and giving us, of course, it has been a great privilege, but a challenge also to put together this program. And I would like to thank Barrister Baldeep Singh, who has done a lot of background work, and administration work was done by Gurbani Kaur. Appreciate that. And Dr. Gurnam Singh and Dr. Harjinder Singh, they have done a lot of work. And a lot of professionals in the backgrounds who have also been active in making their input. And not least Harpreet Kaur here, who provided the backup support and organized the facility for all of us, and NRI Legal Services. And we are grateful to them for providing the premises, the refreshments, and the facilities. So that's greatly appreciated. And I would like to thank my colleagues, Advocate Harjot Singh and Dr. Daljit Kaur for stepping in at the last moment. She was on the back of the plane from India when she was pulled into replacing Dr. Rajinder Kaur Maan, who wasn't able to be here because of ill health. And also, I would like to thank again Barrister Baldeep Singh for stepping in at the last moment as well, because one of our colleagues, Ekvinderjit Singh, whose grandfather passed away, he couldn't be with us. So thank you, Baldeep, for your input. And my colleague on the left, Dr. Professor Nimrita Kaur Brar from Coventry University. She has been a really source of great help, knowledge, know-how, you name it. She's got everything. Dr. Bhaiya, of course, Dr. Bhaiya. Yeah, absolutely. Nimrita Kaur Bhaiya is the full name quite clearly. And of course, we have observed in various academic functions Nimrita's knowledge, insight, and passion for academic development. So big thank yous there. And also, I would like to thank, without naming anyone, all the people who have sent written submissions. They will be duly analyzed.
How many did you receive?
We have received, as I mentioned, altogether about 20 plus 15 here. We have 35 submissions to analyze. But I think the important point is, it's not about the quantity, it's about the quality of submissions we have received. They range from a quite wide range of people who have lifelong experience and lifelong passion of doing things for the community, going out of the way, working hard. And in that sense, they're very important. Now, I think historically, if you look at this year's history, it has been quite significant. Despite all the work that the organizations have done, I observed for 56 years in this country, it was the first time actually when I looked at on the 26th of April, I think, Sikhs being branded, labeled as extremists, lock, stock and barrel, the entire Sikh community. That put a lot of us into action, organizations, individuals, these organizations, and now we're actually positively moving forward to looking at the whole process ahead of time, how we can actually tackle problems which might come our way. So that's really a way forward. So the summary report evidence will be based on objective analysis. It'll be based on recommendations which are going to be made emerging from evidence, not from us as an individual. We will simply use our skill to analyze and pinpoint the evidence and to draw conclusions and make those recommendations. I think the objective is how best UK Sikh communities across the board can engage with British government. It's not about British government engaging with us. how effectively, how efficiently, and proactively we can engage with British government before they actually bring legislation. They're very aware of Sikh community's view. And we're doing all this in the context of quite clearly in a plural, multi-faith democracy and rule of law, civil liberties, and human rights. That's our context. We are very aware and mindful that we were working in multi-faith community. We have diverse culture, and we have diverse processes, and we have a diverse range of political activist organizations and leadership settings. And quite clearly, this is about developing a setting, a framework, a process, a mechanism which can be of value to the whole community as well as to existing bodies. And finally, I would like to say that the timetable would be, that's loud thinking at the moment. We will have analyzed all the data as submissioned by no later than end of November. That gives us about 6 weeks. And by mid-December, we hope to produce a working draft, which will, of course, be thoroughly analyzed by all the relevant people. And then beyond that, it will be submitted to Sikhs in law and Sikhs in academia working councils. And then it will be up to them how they take the process forward. Insofar as this panel is concerned, this independent select committee is concerned, we will have performed our task by producing conclusions, recommendations, and the final output. Then it will be a matter for collective body and the wider society to take the process forward. And from me, I would like to thank you for your thoughts, for your inputs, and for your time. And I'm very grateful. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
We've spoken a lot about coming together and groups rather not coming together. And what we have wanted to demonstrate here, not just as a show, but actually practically, is that organizations can come together. And when they come together and bring their collective intellectual kind of wisdom and authority and experience, they can really make things move and they can have really superb outcomes, especially for the Panth. And as soon as Sikhs in law approached us to say, can we collab on this? You know, within a day, I think we had a meeting the same evening, emergency meeting, because we needed to make a very quick decision. And by 9 o'clock the same day, we said, yes, we can work together on this. And I think the Panth needs to do much more of that. And it's the failure to be able to do that. If they're going to come, then we're not going to come. Or if they're going to sit there, then we're not going to sit there. I think there needs to be a lot more of that happening, a lot more collaboration like this going on, and a lot more organizations coming together to make things like this move. That's all I want to say, because there's a lot more wiser people, a lot more authoritative people than me that have made their comments, and I do apologize if I've said anything out of turn. Thank you, Baldeep Singh. I think yours is a final word. No, it has to be.
Thank you very much for all the contributions that we've received. Thank you for all those that continue to show support with all of the projects that we undertake. It's important that we come together. I hope by now we've proved that there needs to be trust, and that the Panth can trust us. We are not the Panthic voice in the traditional sense, but we are there to certainly guide and provide our skills, which is obviously law, and remain within our remit. So thank you very much. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.